Hey everyone! Welcome back to The Fiction Wizard. Get ready for an amazing tale. Morticia Addams appeared at the welcoming feast and removed Harry from Hogwarts. Dumbledore tried to stop her and failed. Smash that like button and subscribe for more. Here we go. Chapter 1. The letter goes to the wrong house. The owl arrived on a Tuesday, which Morticia Addams found immediately suspicious. Tuesdays had always struck her as the most dishonest day of the week, too far from the weekend to carry any real weight, too ordinary to admit what it truly was, which was Monday wearing a thin disguise. She was in the garden when it came, trimming the heads off her black roses with the calm, methodical attention most people reserved for meditation. The roses didn't mind. They had long since made their peace with Morticia, understanding on some botanical level that the pruning shears were an expression of love and that their mistress simply preferred them at their most dramatic, stems without bloom, all dark potential and no pretty distraction. The owl landed on the garden gate with a sound like a small, feathered catastrophe. It was a large barn owl, broad-chested and imperious, the kind of bird that had clearly never been told no by anything smaller than a mountain. It fixed Morticia with the particular stare of a creature that understood its own importance and expected that understanding to be mutual. In its beak was an envelope, thick cream parchment, sealed in dark wax, addressed in an emerald ink that caught the gray afternoon light in a way that suggested it knew it was being looked at. Morticia set down her shears. She looked at the owl. The owl looked back. "You have good posture," she said. "I respect that." She took the letter. The address read, in that same precise emerald script, Mr. H. Potter, The Rose Garden, Addams Manor, the Hudson Valley. Not Privet Drive. Not Little Whinging, Surrey, where she knew, had always known, in the way that she knew most things that moved through shadow and old blood, that the boy technically lived with his aunt and uncle and their fat little son and their fat little lives. Here. Her garden. Her gate. Morticia turned the envelope over. The seal was a crest she recognized from history, a lion, an eagle, a badger, a snake, arranged around a large letter H with what appeared to be a motto in Latin that she was fairly certain translated to "Never tickle a sleeping dragon," which she appreciated for its directness. She broke the seal and read. The letter was exactly what she expected and nothing she was going to allow. She carried it inside through the back door, past the kitchen where Wednesday was boiling something that smelled like copper and old forest floor, past the sitting room where Pugsley had constructed what appeared to be a scale model of a siege engine out of materials she had expressly asked him not to combine, and up the grand staircase to the study where Gomez was on the telephone with his broker in Buenos Aires, feet on the desk, cigar burning cheerfully between two fingers, gesturing with the other hand at some invisible stock chart only he could see. He looked up when she entered. He always looked up when she entered, had done so for 23 years without exception, as though each time she crossed a threshold it was still the first time and still the most interesting thing that had ever happened in whatever room he was occupying. She had never told him how much this meant to her because she didn't need to. He already knew. She held out the letter. He took it, read it, and his feet came off the desk. "Cara mia," he said, in the voice he used when something had his full and complete attention. "They've written to him," Morticia said. She sat in the chair across from the desk and folded her hands. "Here." Gomez set the phone down without saying goodbye to Buenos Aires. He read the letter again. "He's 11. It's time, of course, the magic's been building in him for years, we've all felt it." He turned the envelope over, examining the address with the focused expression he usually reserved for examining deeds to property in places with interesting tax codes. But they addressed it here, not to Surrey. "Old Magic knows where children belong," Morticia said. "Not necessarily where they sleep." Gomez was quiet for a moment. This was unusual enough to be significant. Gomez Addams was quiet approximately as often as lightning was quiet, it happened, but usually meant something large was building. He set the letter on the desk and looked at her, and she could see him running the calculations behind his eyes, legal, strategic, emotional, all at once, the same way he approached everything that mattered. We could write back, he said. Request a meeting. We could, Morticia agreed. Or I could contact Crossmore, Fitch and Blackthorn. The firm handles wizarding matters, has done since the 1880s. They could file a formal petition for Gomez. He stopped. I'm going myself, she said. He looked at her for a long moment, and then something in him that had been calculating simply let go, and he smiled, wide, genuine, the smile of a man watching his wife be exactly herself. Of course you are, he said. Magnificent woman. He was around the desk in 3 strides and had her hands in both of his and was pressing kisses to her fingers with the focused enthusiasm of someone who had never once in his life done anything halfway. Should I come? Later, she said. First I need to understand what we're walking into. The school. Hogwarts. I know something of it. He was already moving toward the bookshelves that lined 3 walls of the study, ancient, towering, organized according to a system that made sense only to Gomez, which meant organized by emotional resonance rather than subject or alphabet. He pulled 3 books in quick succession, each one thicker than the last, their spines stamped in gold that had dulled to the color of old teeth. 1,000-year-old institution. Scottish castle. Albus Dumbledore, extraordinary wizard, Order of Merlin, first class, former supreme mugwump, twice refused the Ministry of Magic position. Brilliant, beloved, and accustomed, he added, landing on this last word with particular precision, to getting his way. How delightful, Morticia said, and she meant it. She spent the afternoon in the library. Not reading about Hogwarts, she had the books Gomez had pulled and she would get to them, but that wasn't what she needed first. What she needed first was to sit with the thing she had known for 10 years and had managed with quiet, careful attention, and let herself feel the full weight of it now that things were moving. She had first become aware of Harry Potter the way she became aware of most things, through the dead. This required a small amount of context, which was that the Addams family's relationship with death was not metaphorical. It was not aesthetic, though the aesthetics were certainly present. It was practical, and old, and ran through their bloodline the way music ran through a concert hall, permeating everything, impossible to separate from the architecture. Morticia had been able to hear the recently departed since she was 4 years old. Not all of them. Not always clearly. But those with strong enough attachments to the living, those with unfinished things, those who loved people still breathing in the world, they found her the way water found low ground. Lily Potter had found her 3 weeks after the night in Godric's Hollow. Morticia had been pruning the roses, actually, because the roses were where she did her clearest thinking, and she had felt the presence of a young woman standing slightly to her left, radiating the particular quality of grief that belonged not to those who were dead but to those who had died in the middle of something. Died before something was finished. Lily had not been able to speak clearly, the newly dead rarely could, but the impression had been unmistakable. A boy. Dark hair. Green eyes. A cupboard. A cupboard. Morticia had spent the following week being extraordinarily still on the outside and absolutely murderous on the inside. She had gone to Surrey. Once, quietly, in the night, to see what seeing would tell her. She had stood across the street from number 4, Privet Drive, and looked at the darkened windows and felt the boy sleeping inside and felt the quality of what he was sleeping inside, not a home, exactly, but a container. Something that held him without welcoming him. She had stood there for a long time, and she had thought about Lily Potter standing slightly to her left, and she had made a series of decisions. She had not taken him then. She had thought about it. She had thought about it with the precise, calm consideration she gave to all her serious thoughts, and she had concluded that the time wasn't right, that he was safe in the physical sense, that there were protections on the house she could feel even from the street, old and powerful and built on something that wasn't exactly light magic but wasn't dark either, just old, deep magic of the blood and sacrifice variety that she respected. And she had concluded that a woman arriving in the night to collect a child, however well-intentioned, was not a plan. It was an impulse dressed as a plan. So she had waited. She had kept watch in the way that she could, irregular visits to Surrey, feeling for the shape of his life from a distance, asking the occasional favor of those no longer living who moved through Little Whinging. She had made herself known to him exactly twice, once when he was 7 and had climbed over the wall into the Dursleys' back garden to retrieve a ball that Dudley had deliberately kicked over, and found the strange pale woman standing in the alley who had looked at him with dark eyes and said, "You have your mother's hands," and pressed a small obsidian stone into his palm and told him to keep it. He had. She knew more actions right the next chapter now. Chapter 2, The Feast. The carriages had already rolled up to the castle by the time Morticia arrived. She did not take the boats. She did not take the carriages. She walked up the road from the Hogsmeade station at a pace that suggested she had all the time in the world and intended to use every second of it, her black dress moving around her like ink in water, her dark hair piled in its customary arrangement at the back of her neck. She carried nothing except a small black clutch that matched nothing and went with everything. The night was clear and cold and the stars were out in the particular abundance that only happened in Scotland in September, and Morticia looked up at them once with the expression of someone greeting old friends, and then looked back at the castle. Hogwarts was, she would grant it this, genuinely impressive. It rose out of the dark like something that had grown rather than been built, towers and battlements and the deep, warm glow of 1,000 candles pushing through 100 windows, reflected in the black mirror of the lake below. It smelled like stone and old wood and centuries of chalk dust and something underneath all of that, something older and stranger, the particular scent of a place where magic had been done continuously for so long that the magic had become structural. Had become load-bearing. She walked through the main doors as though they had been expecting her. 2 portraits near the entrance hall turned to watch her pass. One, a severe-looking medieval knight, actually took his helmet off. She didn't acknowledge him, but she didn't need to. She already knew where she was going. She had studied the castle's layout with the same thoroughness she applied to everything she deemed worth understanding, and she moved through the entrance hall and toward the double doors at its far end with the directed certainty of someone who had not come to admire the architecture. The great hall was in full swing. She opened the doors. The sound hit her first, the accumulated noise of several hundred children in the heady early chaos of a new school year, all of it bouncing off the stone ceiling and the enchanted sky above and coming back down amplified and multiplied and threaded through with the particular bright edge of excitement. Long tables stretched the length of the hall, draped in the colors of their respective houses, loaded with food that was just beginning to materialize, golden plates stacking themselves, goblets filling, platters of roast appearing from nowhere in the confident, abundant way of magic that had been doing this exact thing for a very long time. At the far end, the staff table ran perpendicular to the rest, elevated slightly, populated with teachers whose faces ranged from bored to tired to genuinely pleased to be back. At the center of the staff table sat a man with a long silver beard and half-moon spectacles and the particular quality of stillness that belonged to people who were accustomed to being the most significant person in any room they entered. Albus Dumbledore was looking at her already. She walked the full length of the great hall. Every table she passed fell silent in sequence, the quiet spreading out from her like a stone dropped in water, until by the time she reached the center of the room there were 400 children watching a woman in black walk toward the headmaster's table with the absolute composure of someone who had come to collect something that belonged to her. She stopped in front of the staff table and looked at Dumbledore, and Dumbledore looked at her, and the silence of the great hall deepened into something that wasn't quite silence so much as held breath. "Madam," Dumbledore said. His voice was warm and measured. It was the voice of a man who had been managing extraordinary situations for 80 years and was prepared to manage one more. "This is rather unexpected." "I doubt that," Morticia said pleasantly. A ripple moved through the students. Someone at the Slytherin table dropped a fork. Dumbledore regarded her for a moment over the half-moon spectacles. The expression behind his eyes was shrewd, patient, and doing an excellent impression of benign curiosity. Morticia recognized it immediately for what it was, assessment, rapid and thorough, running beneath the performance of welcome, and she found it interesting enough to note and irrelevant enough to ignore. Perhaps we might speak privately, he said. After the feast. I would be delighted to. I'm here for Harry Potter, Morticia said. Still pleasant. Not loud. The kind of voice that doesn't need volume because the room is already doing the work. The silence in the great hall achieved a new quality. Several first-years who had been waiting to be sorted exchanged glances. A girl with bushy brown hair near the front of the group, small, bright-eyed, already cataloguing everything she saw, went very still in the particular way of someone whose brain was working 3 times as fast as usual. At the Gryffindor table, a red-haired boy nudged his twin brother. The twin looked at the woman in black and then at his brother and mouthed something that required no translation. Dumbledore set down his goblet. He did it with the deliberate care of a man choosing his next words. Harry is one of our students, he said, with a warmth that was genuine and a firmness that was also genuine and a slight emphasis on our that was entirely intentional. He'll be sorted this evening, along with his classmates. A new chapter, for all of them. The blue eyes were kind and careful above the spectacles. This is a significant night for him. It is, Morticia agreed. Which is why I came. You are, if I might ask, Morticia Addams. She watched the name land. Watched his eyes process it, file it, cross-reference it with whatever Albus Dumbledore kept in the extraordinary filing system behind those eyes. She saw the moment he found it, something shifted, barely, almost imperceptibly, the way a card player's jaw tightens when the hand goes a direction they hadn't fully accounted for. Harry has been in my family's care for some years now, she continued. In the informal sense. We intend to formalize it. Harry has a family, Dumbledore said. The warmth in his voice hadn't shifted but something underneath it had achieved a different texture, still gentle, now also immovable. His aunt and uncle, the Dursleys, are his guardians, as designated by the Dursleys, Morticia said, locked him in a cupboard. Another ripple through the hall, harder this time. Someone at the Hufflepuff table said something under their breath and was shushed by someone else. The bushy-haired girl's mouth had opened slightly. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. It was a particular kind of quiet, not surprised, which was itself a very interesting thing to observe. He set his hands flat on the table in front of him in the gesture of a man preparing to say something reasonable and important. Mrs. Addams, he said, with careful gentleness, I understand your concern. Harry's situation has been monitored closely. There are protections in place, ancient protections, tied to the blood of his family, that keep him safer than any alternative could. He slept in a cupboard, Morticia said, in exactly the same tone as before. For 9 years. The magic that protects him from external threats is admirable. No one protected him from the ones inside the house. She tilted her head slightly. You knew this. The staff table had gone extremely quiet. A woman in emerald green robes, sharp-faced, watchful, with the bearing of a person who had been professionally fair for 30 years and was currently finding fairness very difficult, was looking at Dumbledore with an expression that suggested Morticia's last sentence had landed somewhere personal. Dumbledore held Morticia's gaze. The blue eyes were still kind. They were also, she noted with some interest, genuinely troubled, not by her presence but by the word new, which had apparently hit something real. The situation is more complex than it might appear, he said. Harry's safety, his survival, required certain sacrifices. He's a child, Morticia said. Not a sacrifice. The woman in green, Professor McGonagall, Morticia knew, Transfiguration teacher, deputy headmistress, 25 years at this school and famously formidable, made a sound. It was a very small sound, quickly suppressed, but it was there. Morticia did not look at her. She didn't need to. I'm afraid, Dumbledore said, and his voice had taken on its most careful register now, the one that was the verbal equivalent of a deep foundation, steady, well-intentioned, built to bear weight, that the matter of Harry's guardianship is not something that can be resolved here, this evening. There are legal questions, magical protections to consider, the matter of his education, his education, Morticia agreed, is something I'm very much prepared to discuss. I have tutors in 5 disciplines he hasn't yet encountered, 2 of whom are the best in their respective fields and one of whom is technically dead, which we find adds a useful perspective. She reached into the black clutch and produced, with the calm efficiency of someone who had packed it knowing this exact moment would come, a sheaf of parchment. She set it on the table in front of Dumbledore. This is the formal notice of custodial claim filed yesterday morning with the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, the Department of Child and Family Magical Services, and the Office of the Minister of Magic. You'll see on page 3 that it includes a supporting declaration from the Ancient and Noble Council of Blood Right, which still carries precedent in cases where a magical child's primary residence has been with a non-magical family for more than 7 years. She paused. Copied to 17 individuals in the ministry, because Gomez does enjoy being thorough. Dumbledore looked at the parchment. He did not reach for it. He looked at it in the way a chess player looks at a piece that has arrived from a direction not previously covered by any known opening. Then he looked at her. You've been planning this for some time. Since he was 3 weeks old, she said. I simply waited until the moment it would stick. The hall was silent in a way that great halls rarely achieve, not just quiet but genuinely stopped, 400 children and a full staff holding a collective breath. At the Slytherin table, a pale blonde boy had stopped pretending to eat and was watching the scene at the front of the hall with an expression caught precisely between fascination and alarm. At the Gryffindor table, the twins had abandoned all pretense and had both turned fully around on the bench. The bushy-haired girl had produced a small notebook from somewhere and was watching with enormous eyes. Dumbledore rose. He was taller than she had expected, or perhaps the rising was the thing, the way some people occupy more space when they stand, the way presence can be deployed as a kind of architecture. He came around the staff table with the unhurried grace of a man who had never needed to hurry because the world had always reorganized itself around his pace. He came to stand before Morticia, and he looked at her over the half-moon spectacles with a gaze that was simultaneously the kindest and the most formidable she had encountered in a very long time. Mrs. Addams, he said, quietly now, below the range of the hall. I mean Harry no harm. Everything I have done, everything, has been in service of his survival. There is a darkness coming that you may not fully, I am on excellent terms with darkness, Morticia said, equally quiet, completely serene. We've been neighbors for years. Something happened in Dumbledore's face. It wasn't defeat and it wasn't amusement and it wasn't quite either of the things she might have expected, it was something more complicated, more human. The expression of a man encountering a wall he had not known was there until he walked into it. The prophecy, he said, even lower. There are things at stake that go beyond a prophecy, Morticia said, that concerns a child who was never consulted about it. She held his gaze. Where is he? Dumbledore was quiet. The blue eyes moved over her face with the kind of attention that had mapped a great many people and found this one genuinely, unexpectedly difficult to read. He was looking for leverage and there was none, and she could see him seeing this, and she waited. He's with the other first years, Dumbledore said at last. In the antechamber. Waiting to be sorted. Take me to him, Morticia said. Dumbledore looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned and said, quietly, to Professor McGonagall, Minerva. Would you mind? McGonagall, whose expression had been doing something complicated and controlled for the last several minutes, stood, smoothed her robes, and said, with perfect composure, of course. She came around the table and gestured toward a side door, and Morticia followed her, and the hall exhaled behind them. The antechamber off the great hall was smaller than Morticia had imagined, a stone room with torches and a single large mirror in a heavy frame and approximately 21st years standing in a cluster with the slightly dazed quality of people who had been asked to wait rather than told for how long. They were in their robes, all of them, the black fabric making them look uniformly like small, uncertain ravens, and they stood in the instinctive social formations of 11-year-olds, some already in pairs and trios, some still carefully alone at the edges. Harry Potter was near the back wall, slightly apart from the nearest group, not by exclusion but by the particular quality of solitude that she recognized as learned rather than preferred, the solitude of someone who had spent 10 years in a house where being noticed was usually bad. He was smaller than she had expected from recent surveillance, or perhaps it was the robes, or perhaps it was the posture, the slightly compressed bearing of a person who has spent a long time trying to take up less space than they actually need. Dark hair, messier than it had any practical reason to be. Her mother's eyes, green as old glass, behind round glasses with a crack in one lens that had been repaired with something that was definitely not proper spellotape and probably was spellotape. He was looking at the other students with an expression that wanted very much to be neutral and was actually something much more fragile than that, the expression of someone watching other people belong to something and trying to decide if there was room for them. Then he saw Morticia. She watched the recognition move through him, slow at first, then faster, like warmth returning to a cold hand. He straightened almost imperceptibly. Something behind his eyes shifted from careful neutrality to something with an actual name, and the name was real. She walked toward him through the cluster of first years, who parted around her with the automatic deference of people responding to something they couldn't quite name. She stopped in front of him. "Hello, Harry," she said. "Mrs. Addams," he said. His voice was trying for casual and landing somewhere between confused and something very close to relief. "What are you? How did you? The letter came to my garden," she said. He blinked. What? Magic knows where it should." She looked at him properly, the cracked glasses, the two large robes, the scar on his forehead that she had always been able to feel from a distance the way one can feel a fire through a wall. She had felt it more strongly since he had stepped into the wizarding world proper, the way a scar that had been quiet for years can begin to ache when the weather changes. "How are you?" He stopped, recalibrated. "Confused, mostly. There was a giant, and a boat, and now there's a talking hat, apparently, Harry," she said, and the shift in her voice was small but it brought him back to the present and to her. "I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. Not what you think you should say. What you actually think." He looked at her. The green eyes behind the cracked glasses were much too old for 11 and she had always known that, and it had always made something in her chest do something that she didn't have a word for in most languages but did in one, sodade. Grief for something lost before it had the chance to be found. "Do you want to stay here?" she asked. "At this school? With these people? On their terms?" The antechamber was very quiet. The other first years had gone still in the instinctive way of young creatures recognizing that something important was happening nearby. At the door, McGonagall stood with her hands folded and her face arranged with a composure that cost her more than it showed. Harry thought about the question with the seriousness it deserved. She could see him thinking, genuinely thinking, not performing thoughtfulness but actually running through things, memories and impressions and the feeling of the day, which had been extraordinary and overwhelming and so laden with the promise of belonging that it had been almost physically painful. "The woman at the inn," he said slowly. "The one who told me I was a wizard. She said, everyone knows who I am here. That I'm famous." "Yes," Morticia said. "I didn't know why," he said. "I still don't really. Not all of it." He looked down at his hands. "And Dumbledore, the headmaster, when I saw him at the table, I thought," he paused. "He knows things. About me. Things he hasn't said." "He does," Morticia agreed. "You know them too." It wasn't a question. "Some of them," she said. "Not all. I don't know all of it, Harry. I won't pretend I do. But you came anyway." "I came because of what I know," she said. "And what I know is enough." He looked at her for a long time. In the torchlight the scar on his forehead was very visible and the tiredness behind his eyes was also very visible, and neither of these things were things she looked away from. She had never looked away from Harry Potter's difficult things. She had always thought that was the very minimum he deserved. If I go with you, he said carefully, will I still learn magic? You'll learn more magic than this school could teach you in 7 years, she said. Different magic. Older, in some ways. You'll also learn 7 other subjects that this curriculum doesn't offer, and you'll learn them from people who are extraordinarily good at them, and you will never be put in a cupboard again for any reason by anyone, and if anyone attempts it I will be made aware of it within the hour. He stared at her. You knew about the cupboard. Yes. And you didn't, he stopped. There was a flash of something in his face, not anger exactly, but the close cousin of anger, the one that lives right next to hurt. Why didn't you? Because I needed it to last, she said quietly. The legal claim. The formal one. If I had simply taken you, they could have taken you back. I needed it to be permanent. She held his gaze. I am sorry it took this long. I am not sorry I waited to do it correctly. He was quiet. She let the quiet sit. She didn't try to fill it with reassurance or justification, she had said what was true and she had said it plainly and now it was his to do with what he chose. He looked at the doors to the great hall. Beyond them, the feast was going on, the noise was audible even here, the clink and murmur of several hundred people eating and talking in the particular atmosphere of a beginning. He could hear it, the pull of it, the same pull she had seen in his face when he'd looked at the other students. Then he looked back at her. Okay, he said. It was not a dramatic word. It was not the word of someone surrendering something or performing a decision. It was the word of someone who had looked at a thing honestly and chosen. She had always thought okay was one of the most underrated words in the English language, so small, so absolute. Okay, she said. She turned and looked at McGonagall, who had been standing at the door with the expression of a woman at war with herself. The deputy headmistress of Hogwarts, 30 years of institutional loyalty, a witch of remarkable ability and genuine integrity, looked back at Morticia and in her eyes there was something doing battle, the part of her that was Hogwarts and the part of her that had, 4 seconds ago, heard a child say he'd been in a cupboard and watched his headmaster almost not react. Professor McGonagall, Morticia said, thank you for bringing me here. McGonagall's jaw was very tight. Mrs. Addams, she said. I need to ask, the protections. The blood wards. You understand what? I understand the theory, Morticia said. I also understand that magical protection built on a foundation of suffering has a structural weakness that tends to reveal itself at the worst possible moment. I've made other arrangements. McGonagall absorbed this. She looked at Harry. Harry looked back at her with the careful, non-confrontational expression of someone trying not to cause trouble by existing. McGonagall took a breath. I'll inform the headmaster, she said, and her voice was the voice of someone who had made a decision they would have to live with and had decided to live with it standing upright. He will want to speak with you before you go. He can speak with my attorneys, Morticia said pleasantly. Mr. Addams has already retained Crossmoor, Fitch, and Blackthorn. The senior partner is available Thursday. She turned to Harry. Do you have things to collect? A trunk, he said. And an owl. We'll collect your trunk and your owl, she said. And then we'll go. He nodded. He glanced once more at the doors to the great hall, at the light around the edges of them, warm and gold, the sound of all those children eating and laughing and beginning. She watched him look at it. She did not look away from that either. Then he turned away from it and walked toward her, and she put her hand on his shoulder, and they walked out of the antechamber together into the corridor. Dumbledore was waiting in the corridor. He had not gone back to his seat. He stood in the stone passage with his hands folded inside his robes, the long silver beard catching the torchlight, the blue eyes above the half-moon spectacles carrying the expression of a man who had experienced a great many things that surprised him and had learned to absorb each one with grace. He looked at Harry. Something moved through his face when he looked at Harry, something genuine and complicated, not performance, not calculation, but the real thing, whatever name it had. He looked at the boy with the particular grief of a person watching a plan they believed in change shape in their hands. "Harry," he said warmly. "There is no need for any rush this evening." "The feast, I'm going with Mrs. Addams," Harry said. Dumbledore's eyes moved to Morticia. The warmth remained in his expression, and underneath it now was something that wanted to negotiate, to extend the conversation, to find the angle that would change the outcome. She could see him working. He was good. He was genuinely, extraordinarily good. The charm was real, the concern was real, the love for the boy was, she believed, also real. None of that changed anything. "Mrs. Addams," he said, quiet and measured, "you strike me as a woman of considerable wisdom. You understand, I think, what Harry is. What his presence in the wizarding world means. There are forces moving that I have spent 30 years preparing against, preparations that require, that depend upon, certain conditions being, certain conditions," Morticia said, "including a child's suffering." "Including his safety," Dumbledore said, and he said it with the full weight of his conviction, and it landed with real force because it was genuine. The safety he meant was real, the threat was real, and he believed with everything in him that what he had done was necessary. She held the weight of that. She didn't dismiss it. "I believe you," she said. "I believe you believe that completely. I believe you've carried it for 30 years and I believe it has cost you. I also believe that you have confused what is necessary with what is convenient, and I believe that the difference between those two things is a child's entire life." She looked at him steadily. "We will not be negotiating this evening. If you want to discuss Harry's safety, his education, or the threat you're preparing against, you are welcome to do so through appropriate channels with my family present. I am willing to have that conversation." She moved forward. Dumbledore did not step aside immediately, not aggressively, not as a block, but with the momentary gravity of a man not quite ready to concede a thing he has held for a decade. Then he stepped aside. "He will need training," Dumbledore said quietly, as they passed. "For what's coming. He will need to know what he is." "He will know exactly what he is," Morticia said, without turning. "He'll simply have the opportunity to be something else first." They walked down the corridor, Harry's footsteps quick and slightly uneven beside hers, and behind them Hogwarts glowed and hummed with 1,000 years of history, and a very old man stood in the passage and watched them go. Harry didn't speak until they were outside, under the Scottish stars, the castle behind them and the long road to the gate ahead. His breath made small clouds in the September air. He walked beside her with his hands in his pockets and his eyes forward and the expression of someone processing something very large and finding, to their own surprise, that the ground under it felt solid. "He's not going to just let this go," Harry said. "No," Morticia said. "What do we do about that?" She considered. The stars were very bright overhead and the lake was dark and enormous to their left, and somewhere ahead of them, beyond the gate and the darkened village and the long road south, Gomez was almost certainly on 4 telephones at once, and the children were probably doing something inadvisable, and the house was lit up against the dark the way it always was, excessive and warm and wrong by most standards and exactly right by hers. "We do what we always do," she said. "We remain exactly ourselves. It tends to resolve most things." Harry thought about this. "And the things it doesn't resolve?" She glanced at him. He was looking up at her with the green eyes, genuinely curious, genuinely asking, not afraid, just asking. Something about that, the simple, direct asking, the absence of the flinch she had expected, moved through her like a chord. "Those," she said, "we enjoy." The ghost of something crossed his face. Not quite a smile, not yet, not enough history in it yet for a real one, but the shape of one. The suggestion that one was possible. They walked through the gate, and the stone arch of Hogwarts closed behind them, and the night opened up ahead, vast and cold and full of stars, and Harry Potter walked into it beside Morticia Addams for the first time as someone being taken somewhere rather than taken from somewhere, and the difference, he was already beginning to understand, was everything. Chapter 3, The House on the Hill. The drive took 4 hours, which was 3 hours and 50 minutes longer than it needed to take. Morticia had arranged a car, not a taxi, not a hire car, but the family's own vehicle, a 1938 Packard the color of a funeral that ran on something other than petrol and had never once, in 60 years of operation, been pulled over by anyone, possibly because police officers experienced an instinctive reluctance to approach it. The driver was Lurch, who communicated primarily through a vocabulary of 3 sounds and whose physical presence in the driver's seat made the car look, from outside, like it was driving itself. Harry had stopped walking when he saw it waiting outside the Hogsmeade gate, the engine idling with a sound like distant thunder. "Is that," he started. "Ours," Morticia said, and opened the rear door. Harry got in. He sat very straight for the first 40 minutes, watching the Scottish countryside go dark outside the windows, the occasional lit farmhouse blurring past, the mountains becoming shapes and then shadows and then suggestions. His owl, a snowy white bird he'd called Hedwig, which Morticia found entirely sensible, was in her cage on the seat beside him, watching everything with the regal calm of a creature that had decided to reserve judgment. The trunk was in the boot. Lurch drove. Morticia sat with her hands folded and let the silence do what silence was good at, which was giving people room to arrive at their own thoughts without interference. Harry lasted until they crossed the border into England. "You said you'd known about me since I was 3 weeks old," he said. "Yes." "How?" She looked at him. The motorway lights were passing over his face in slow pulses, light and dark, and his eyes were on her and waiting with the directness she had been noticing since the antechamber, the quality of someone who had learned not to expect honest answers and had decided to ask for them anyway on the theory that occasionally they arrived. "Your mother," she said. He went very still. "She's dead." "Yes," Morticia said. "That's how I knew her." The passing lights. The motorway. Lurch's enormous shoulders motionless in the front seat. Harry looked at her for a long time, and she let him look, and she watched him work through whether he was being told something cruel and deciding he wasn't, and then working through whether he was being told something impossible and deciding that was less clear. "You can talk to dead people," he said. "Sometimes," she said. "The ones with something left to say." "And my mother, she found me 3 weeks after Godric's Hollow," Morticia said. She couldn't say much. "They rarely can, that soon. But she told me enough." She looked at the road ahead. "She was worried about you." Harry was quiet. When she glanced at him, his jaw was set in the way she had come to understand was him managing something large by making his face very small. He was 11. He was doing it with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd had to do it constantly for years. "She told you about the cupboard," he said. "Not in words," Morticia said. "But yes." He nodded once, sharp, like someone filing a thing away. "Then, is she still?" "No," Morticia said, gently. She said what she needed to say. "She's been quiet for years." She paused. "That's not a sad thing, Harry. That means she finished." He absorbed this. The set of his jaw shifted slightly, not loosening, but changing, the way tension changes when it's been named. "Okay," he said, which she was beginning to understand was his word for things he was choosing to accept rather than fight. "Okay," she agreed. He looked out the window. "After a while, what's your house like?" "Terrible," she said, with warm approval. "You'll love it." He glanced at her sideways, uncertain whether this was a joke. She offered nothing to clarify, and after a moment he looked back out the window and she saw, in the glass, the reflection of his face, and on it the smallest and most tentative and most honest thing, the very beginning of anticipation. They arrived at Addams Manor at 1:30 in the morning. Harry had been asleep for the last hour, his head against the window, the cracked glasses slightly askew, Hedwig dozing in her cage beside him. Morticia had watched the familiar shape of the house materialize out of the dark from a mile away, the way it always did, growing from suggestion to silhouette to the full impossible reality of it, rising above the surrounding trees like something that had decided the laws of architectural proportion didn't apply to it and had been proved correct. Every window was lit. This was standard. The house was always lit. Even the windows that didn't have rooms behind them. She touched Harry's shoulder. "We're here." He came awake cleanly, without the disoriented flailing of deep sleep, the sleep habit of someone who had learned to wake quickly. He pushed the glasses straight and looked out the window and said nothing for a long moment. The house looked back at him. It was large in the way of things that had been added to repeatedly over generations with no governing philosophy beyond more, turrets that didn't match, windows of different eras, a widow's walk along the roof's east side, a conservatory extension that appeared to have been constructed during a period when someone in the family had strong feelings about iron lattice. The garden that ran up to the front door was the kind of garden that would have made a horticulturalist weep, not from neglect but from intention, everything dark and sharp and growing in configurations that suggested a passionate disagreement with the concept of cheerful landscaping. A large iron gate stood open. It had a habit of opening before cars arrived, which the family had long since stopped commenting on. Harry started. "Yes," Morticia said. "I was going to say amazing." She looked at him. He was looking at the house with an expression she hadn't quite seen on him before, not the fragile wanting she'd seen in the great hall, not the careful neutrality of the corridor, but something with actual light in it. Something that didn't know yet whether it was allowed. "It is," she agreed. The front door opened before they reached it. Gomez came through it like weather, fast, warm, loud, the kind of entrance that expanded to fill available space immediately. He was in his shirt sleeves, no jacket, tie loosened, a cigar burning in one hand and a glass of something dark in the other, and his face when he saw the car was the face of a man for whom good news was a physical sensation. "They're here," he announced, to no one in particular, to everyone, to the night itself. He descended the front steps at a pace that was technically not running but contained running's entire spirit. The cigar was transferred to the hand holding the glass, and both hands were extended, and Harry, who had barely gotten out of the car, found himself briefly and comprehensively embraced by a man he had never met before. Gomez held him at arm's length and looked at him with the full beam of his attention. "Harry. Tremendous. Absolutely tremendous. Gomez Addams, call me Gomez, everyone does, even people who probably shouldn't." He clapped him on both shoulders. "You look like your mother around the eyes. Same gravitas. Magnificent." He transferred one of his hands to Morticia and pressed her fingers to his lips with a reverence that was completely unironic. "Cara mia. You were brilliant, I assume?" "I was adequate," Morticia said. "She was incandescent," Gomez told Harry, conspiratorially. "She always says adequate. She was incandescent." He retrieved his cigar and looked between them, and his whole face was doing something that no face should be able to do, which was simultaneously communicating delight and relief and love and a very sincere desire to fight Albus Dumbledore in a court of law. "Come inside. Everyone's up. Yes, I know it's 1 a.m, I'm aware. I told them to go to bed." Clearly that was purely ceremonial. He was already heading back to the door, talking continuously, and Harry looked at Morticia with an expression that was half overwhelmed and half something that might, in better light, have been amusement. "Is he always?" he started. "Always," she said. "You get used to it within the week, and after that you can't imagine any other way." They went inside. The entrance hall of Addams Manor was large and dark and full of things that had been acquired over generations according to a consistent aesthetic sensibility and no apparent concern for resale value. The floor was black and white tile in a pattern that did something optically uncomfortable if you looked at it straight on. The staircase swept up to the left, wide and dramatic, hung with portraits of Adam's ancestors who did not smile but did watch with the attentive stillness of the genuinely interested. A chandelier overhead held real candles, 40 of them, and they were all lit, casting light that was adequate for seeing and insufficient for comfort, which suited the house exactly. Mounted on the wall between 2 portraits was a broadsword. Next to it, a crossbow. Below those, a framed piece of needlework that read "Home is where the heart is" in letters that, on closer inspection, were embroidered in what appeared to be actual black thorns. Harry stood in the entrance hall and turned slowly, taking it in, and Morticia watched his face do something extraordinary, which was simply open. The careful compression, the practiced smallness, the habit of taking up less space, it loosened, and for a moment she could see the actual shape of him underneath it, curious and alert and hungry for things in the way that children who haven't been allowed to want things are always hungry. Harry. He turned. Coming down the stairs were Wednesday and Pugsley Addams, in that order, Wednesday first, Pugsley a step behind, both in dark nightclothes that managed to suggest they had been awake and dressed for hours and had merely changed for form's sake. Wednesday was 13, dark-haired, pale, and carried her stillness the way some people carry weapons, as a deliberate and functional choice. Pugsley was 12, rounder and more cheerful in a way that had always coexisted perfectly naturally with his genuine enthusiasm for things that exploded. Wednesday looked at Harry with an expression that was, for Wednesday, warm, which meant it contained no specific threat and allowed for the possibility of interest. "You're shorter than I expected," she said. "You're scarier than I expected," Harry said. A fractional pause. Then, "Good," Wednesday said, and came the rest of the way down the stairs. "I'm Wednesday. This is Pugsley. The one talking to himself in the sitting room is Uncle Fester." "I can hear you," called a voice from the sitting room. "That was for his benefit, not yours," Wednesday called back. Harry blinked. Something was happening in his expression. The overwhelmed part and the amused part were fighting for territory, and the amused part was gaining ground. Pugsley extended a hand with the straightforward energy of someone who had never once spent time worrying about whether he was likable enough. "Pugsley. Do you like things that make loud noises?" "I don't know," Harry said honestly. "Perfect," Pugsley said. "We'll find out together." "Come," Gomez said, from the doorway of the sitting room. "Food." Lurch made something. "It's best not to ask what." Uncle Fester materialized from the sitting room, bald, round, luminous in a way that was literal rather than metaphorical, since Fester had always had the ability to light a small bulb by placing it in his mouth, which he demonstrated, unprompted, upon meeting Harry. Harry stared. Fester removed the bulb. "Party trick," Fester said cheerfully. "I've got others." "How are you with electrical current?" "He's just arrived," Morticia said, with the tone of someone who had given this particular instruction many times. "Right, right." Fester subsided with the amiability of a man who was genuinely incapable of taking offense and also genuinely incapable of following instructions for more than a few consecutive minutes. He settled into an armchair. "Welcome to the family." "Roughly speaking." "Roughly speaking," Gomez confirmed, from the sideboard, where he was pouring things. "The formal legal process is ongoing, but the sentiment is entirely operational." He handed Harry a glass of something dark and warm that smelled like autumn and turned out to taste like spiced apple cider with something underneath it that Harry couldn't name and that made the tips of his fingers feel interesting. "Sit down. Eat. Tell me about the school." Harry sat on the sofa between Pugsley and Wednesday, who had flanked him with the unconscious efficiency of people rearranging themselves around a new center of gravity. He told them about the school, about the boats across the Black Lake, about the ceiling of the Great Hall with its candles and its enchanted sky, about the chaos when Morticia had walked in. This last part he told carefully, watching their faces, and what he found there was, Gomez nodded repeatedly with the expression of someone gratified by a confirmed forecast. Wednesday listened with the stillness of someone cataloging. Pugsley was openly delighted, and Fester let out a single bark of laughter when Harry described the silence spreading across the hall. "She does that," Fester said. "The silence thing. She's been doing it since she was about your age. She walked into her first cotillion and the string quartet stopped playing. Not on purpose. They just stopped. The first violinist later said he'd forgotten how, Morticia confirmed, from the armchair by the window, where she had settled with the ease of a woman returning to the place where she thought most clearly. Harry looked at her across the room. "What happens now?" he asked. Not nervous, just asking, in the direct way he'd been asking things all night. The way she was coming to understand was simply how he operated when he felt safe enough to operate honestly. "Tomorrow," Morticia said, "you sleep. The day after, we begin to work out what you know and what you need to know and what no one has thought to teach you yet. Next week, Gomez has a meeting with Crossmore and Fitch about the legal situation. In approximately 10 days, Dumbledore will try something." Harry processed this. "What will he try?" "I don't know yet," Morticia said. "He's creative. I expect it'll be interesting." "Are you worried?" The room was quiet in the particular way of a family that had learned the value of letting a question breathe. "No," Morticia said. Harry nodded. He looked down at his glass, and then around the room, at the dark walls hung with their peculiar art, at the fire burning black-red in the enormous fireplace, at Gomez now mid-conversation with Fester about something involving stock options and at least one castle in Transylvania, at Wednesday watching the fire with the composed attention she brought to everything, at Pugsley, who had fallen asleep sitting up with the sudden totality of the young and the uncomplicated. Harry looked at all of it and something shifted in his face again, not the small tentative thing from the car, but something fuller and more frightened in the specific way of something real, something you're not sure you're allowed to have. "It's very strange," he said, quietly. "I kept thinking tonight, at the feast, in the corridor, I kept thinking I was making a mistake. That I was giving something up. The school and the magic and all of it." No one said anything. The fire shifted. "But it doesn't feel like a mistake," he said. He seemed slightly surprised by this. Wednesday looked at him. "It isn't," she said, with the absolute certainty she brought to all her statements. "The school would have used you. It's a good school for some purposes. For your purposes it was a cage with better food than the last one." "Wednesday," Gomez said, not sharply. "She's right, though," Harry said. He looked mildly surprised to hear himself say it. "The way they all looked at me. Even the ones being friendly, they already knew who I was. They'd already decided what I was." He paused. "I don't know what I am yet." 11, Morticia said. "That's what you are. Everything else can wait." He looked at her across the room, and the fire lit the left side of his face, and she could see quite clearly, in the green eyes, something coming loose, something that had been held tight for a very long time by the accumulated weight of cupboards and Dursleys and chosen ones and the particular kind of loneliness that comes from being known by your reputation and invisible as a person. It was coming loose the way a knot comes loose when the right thread is pulled, not dramatically, not all at once, but in the irreversible way of things that have finally found a reason. He didn't cry. She hadn't expected him to. He would, eventually. She knew that. There was a great deal in him that needed to come out, and it would come out in its own time and she would be here for it. But not tonight. Tonight he just looked at her with the green eyes and said nothing, and she looked back, and the fire burned and Pugsley snored lightly and somewhere deep in the house something made a sound that was probably the ghost in the east wing and was definitely not a structural issue. "Come," Morticia said, and stood. "I'll show you your room." She walked him up the stairs, past the watching portraits, past the third-floor landing where the corridor went sideways in a way that couldn't be explained by the house's exterior dimensions, and to the room at the end of the east hallway that she had quietly been preparing for 3 months. Not since the letter, since April, when something in the house had shifted in the way it shifted when it knew something was coming, and she had begun to understand that the season for waiting was almost over. The room was not what he had expected. She could tell by the way he stopped in the doorway, and she stepped aside to let him see. It was a good room. High ceiling, tall windows that looked out over the garden toward the trees. A bed that was actually a bed, not elaborate, but real and substantial and made with clean dark sheets. A desk by the window, large and practical. Shelves along one wall, currently empty, waiting. A lamp with a warm bulb. On the desk, a stack of books, not schoolbooks, but the books she had chosen specifically for him, field guides to magical creatures, a history of magic that was not the one Hogwarts used, a collection of magical theory that made no assumptions about its reader's background, and, at the top, a slim volume with a black cover and no title on the spine, which was her personal journal of the magical theory she had developed over 40 years and had never shared with anyone outside the family. He saw it. Looked up at her. "The untitled one is mine," she said. "Read it when you want. Ask me about anything in it." He picked it up, carefully, with both hands. Set it back down. Ran his fingers along the desk's edge. Turned and looked at the room, the full room, in the way she had been watching him look at things all night, that same quality of attention, careful and thorough, the look of someone making sure a thing is real before they let themselves want it. Hedwig's cage was by the window. The owl was awake now, turning her head to observe the room with gold eyes. Harry walked to the window and looked out into the dark garden. From here you could see the greenhouse, or what served as a greenhouse, more properly a glass-paneled structure full of things Morticia grew that had no Latin classification because they hadn't been discovered by anyone with a Latin classification system. You could see the shadow of the old stone wall and the trees beyond it, black against a sky with too many stars. "The family," Harry said. He was still looking out the window. "Gomez, he's loud." "He is. And Wednesday is, yes. And he paused, seeming to search for the right word for Uncle Fester and giving up. "They're all, yes," Morticia said. "They're all actually," he stopped again. Tried again. "They're actually, Harry," she said gently. He turned from the window. "They were happy I was here," he said. "Not because of anything, not because of the scar, or who I am, or whatever it is Dumbledore thinks I'm for. Just, she agreed. He looked at her. Something in him was very close to the surface. "Is that normal?" he asked. Is that what families are normally like?" She thought about the honest answer. "I can only speak for this one," she said. "But for this one, yes. That's exactly what it's like." He was quiet. Hedwig rustled her feathers. "Get some sleep," Morticia said. She moved to the door. "The house makes sounds at night. Most of them are harmless. If something comes through the wall, call for Lurch." He blinked. "Through the, good night, Harry." "Good night, Mrs. Addams." She paused at the door. Looked back. He was standing in the middle of his room, with the cracked glasses and the dark hair and the scar and the green eyes, and he looked, for the first time since she had known him from a distance and now knew him from close up, like someone who was simply in a place. "Morticia," she said. "Sorry." "You can call me Morticia." He thought about it. Tried it out silently, she could see his lips move. Nodded. "Okay," he said. "Morticia." She walked back to the master bedroom where Gomez was already waiting, the lamp lit, some document spread across the bedspread that was almost certainly a legal filing and almost certainly for her to review and almost certainly something he was very proud of. He looked up when she entered, and his face did the thing it always did, the full, comprehensive thing that included the delight and the love and the particular relief of a person seeing the person they cannot be the best version of themselves without. "Well," he said. She sat on the edge of the bed. He asked if it was normal, she said. "For a family to be happy you were there." Gomez was quiet for a beat. Then, with remarkable softness for a man of his volume, "Oh, that poor kid." "Yes," Morticia said. "We're going to fix that." Not a question. Not a plan. A statement of simple fact, the way Gomez stated all the things he was completely certain of. "We are," she agreed. She reached over and turned off the lamp, and outside the east window the stars were very bright over the garden, and inside the room at the end of the east hallway, Harry Potter lay on his back on an actual bed with actual sheets and listened to the house settle around him, the creaks and murmurs and the distant sound of something moving in the walls that was probably not dangerous, and stared at the ceiling in the dark, and felt the strange, specific, terrifying feeling of a person who has walked out of a story they were told about themselves and into a life they haven't been told about yet. It felt like standing at the edge of something very high. It felt nothing like falling. By morning he was asleep with Hedwig on the pillow beside him, which was against several rules that Morticia had not yet had the chance to make, and which she decided, looking in through the door on her way down to the garden, could wait. The roses needed attention. The world could have an hour. Chapter 4, The Ministry Moves. The letter from the Ministry arrived on a Thursday, which Morticia found even more suspicious than the Tuesday owl. Thursday was the day bureaucracies moved. She had observed this across 3 continents and 60 years of occasionally adversarial relationships with official institutions, and it held without exception. Monday was intention. Wednesday was preparation. Thursday was the letter that arrived in a ministry-crested envelope with a tone of polite authority that was actually a demand wearing a blazer, accompanied by the particular kind of legal language that sounded reasonable until you read it twice and understood it was a trap. This one was better than most. She read it at the kitchen table while Gomez made coffee, and Wednesday observed a spider rebuild its web on the windowsill with the focused approval of an architect, and Harry came downstairs at 8:30 with his hair doing something that defied both gravity and description, Morticia's untitled journal under one arm. He had been at the manor for 9 days. In 9 days he had learned the layout of the house, including the third-floor corridor that went sideways and the basement room that was best approached with a clear intention and left the same way. He had spent 3 afternoons in Morticia's greenhouse learning the names and properties of plants that had no names in any published text, which he did with the focused, hungry attention of someone who had always wanted to learn things and had been given very little opportunity. He had spent 2 evenings with Uncle Fester discovering that he had an instinctive affinity for electrical currents, which Fester had declared a tremendous gift and Morticia had declared interesting. He had eaten real meals at a real table and gone to bed in a real bed, and twice had come down in the morning with the slightly dazed expression of someone who had slept genuinely well and hadn't yet normalized it. He had not talked about Hogwarts, and she had not pressed. He had not talked about the Dursleys either, and she had not pressed about that. She was a patient woman. Things came out when they were ready. She had learned this from the dead, who communicated only when they had something worth saying and said nothing at all until then. "What's that?" he asked, sliding into the chair across from her and looking at the letter. "The Ministry of Magic," she said, "would like us to attend a hearing." Gomez turned from the stove. "Ah," he said, in the voice he reserved for problems that interested him. "When?" "Monday." She set the letter on the table between them. Gomez crossed the kitchen in 4 strides and read over her shoulder, and she felt the shift in him, the acceleration, the particular electric quality that problems worth solving produced in him the way a proper composition produced it in a musician. His hand found her shoulder and squeezed once. "Crossmore's going to love this," he said. "Who's Crossmore?" Harry asked. "Augustine Crossmore," Gomez said, moving to pour coffee. "Senior partner of Crossmore, Fitch and Blackthorne. Finest magical law firm in the Northern Hemisphere. Augustine is 83 years old, has argued 42 cases before the Wisingamot, has lost 6, and considers those 6 losses educational experiences that have made him effectively unbeatable." He set a cup in front of Harry, not coffee, he was 11, but the cider that had become his morning standard, and one in front of Morticia and one in front of Wednesday, who accepted hers without looking away from the spider. "He was also at Hogwarts with Dumbledore, which I regard as an extraordinary piece of luck." Harry had been reading the letter, turned to face his direction. He set it down. "They want to make you give me back," he said. Flat, factual, and underneath it something that was doing its level best to stay flat and factual. "They want to establish the legal question of your guardianship," Morticia said. Which is a different thing. They don't have the authority to make us do anything. They have the authority to require a hearing, and we are required to attend, and at the hearing they will make arguments and we will make arguments and an adjudicator will decide. She looked at him steadily. The arguments we are making are better. How do you know? Because we've had 9 days to prepare them and Dumbledore has spent those 9 days attempting to reach us by letter, by messenger, and through 2 intermediaries, none of whom got past the front gate, and each failed attempt to negotiate is a day he hasn't spent preparing a proper legal strategy. She picked up her coffee. He's a brilliant man. He is not accustomed to a situation he cannot manage through conversation. Harry thought about this. He stopped. Go on, she said. He seemed like he actually cared, Harry said. The words came out carefully, the way careful words do when they're covering something complicated. In the corridor. When he looked at me. It wasn't fake. No, Morticia said. It wasn't. Harry looked at his hands. That makes it more confusing. Yes, she said. People who do damaging things from genuine love are the most confusing kind. They're also the hardest to argue against, because they're arguing in good faith. She set the cup down. It doesn't make what they've done acceptable. He absorbed this in the particular way he absorbed hard things, not flinching from it, not filing it away either, but sitting with it and turning it over until he found the shape of it. She had watched him do this with the harder things she'd told him about his mother, about the protections on Privet Drive, about the prophecy, which she had told him about on day 4, plainly and completely, because she had decided when she walked out of Hogwarts that Harry Potter was going to know the truth about his own life and that this was non-negotiable. He'd taken the prophecy news better than she'd expected, which on reflection made complete sense. A child who has spent 11 years being told he doesn't matter, when told that apparently he matters a very great deal, doesn't react with horror. He reacts with a complicated mix of anger and exhaustion and the specific frustration of having been kept from information that was always about you. He had sat at the kitchen table on day 4 and listened, and when she finished he had said, with remarkable composure, "So Dumbledore always knew Voldemort would come back and he wanted me ready. That's why the school. That's why leaving me at the Dursleys. That's the most likely interpretation," Morticia had said. He was training me, Harry had said, and the flatness of it had made the whole room briefly very still. Like conditioning. The Dursleys were to make me, he'd stopped. Humble. He wanted me humble. Morticia had said nothing. She had found this to be the most devastating analysis she had yet heard of Albus Dumbledore's methodology, and she wasn't going to dilute it by adding to it. Harry had nodded once, sharp, the filing away nod. And then he'd said, "What's for dinner?" and gone back to the greenhouse. Now he picked up the ministry letter again and read it through a second time. She watched him read, watching also the way his eyes moved, fast, thorough, catching the specific phrases that mattered. He had, she was noticing with increasing satisfaction, an extremely good mind. Not the flashy, performative intelligence that announced itself, the quiet, structural kind that worked underneath the surface and arrived at conclusions while other people were still setting up the question. They cite Dumbledore as a supporting party, he said. He's filed a declaration. 3 declarations, Gomez said, sitting down now with a plate of something that was definitely not a conventional breakfast but was probably edible. I have copies. Augustine got them by Wednesday. They're good, I'll give him that. He argues on grounds of magical protection, educational necessity, and an old statute called the Provision of Extraordinary Magical Circumstances, which has only been invoked 8 times in the last 300 years and which, in most of those cases, was used to justify keeping dangerous objects in institutional custody rather than private hands. He's categorizing Harry as a dangerous object, Wednesday said, still watching the spider. He is arguing that Harry requires institutional protection due to circumstances beyond ordinary. He's categorizing Harry as a dangerous object, Wednesday said again, with the calm precision of a person who considered clarity a form of respect. Silence at the table. Harry looked at Wednesday. Something moved through his face. "Yeah," he said quietly. Yeah." Wednesday looked at him. For Wednesday, this was as close as she came to a gentleness, the full, direct look that acknowledged a thing rather than softening it. "It's not what you are," she said. "It's how he needs to frame you to make his argument work. There's a difference." "I know," Harry said. He did. She could see him knowing it. But knowing a thing doesn't always prevent it from landing. She let it land. She let him feel it. She didn't reach over and smooth it away, because smoothing things away had been done to this boy his entire life, his grief smoothed away, his strangeness smoothed away, his very existence rendered as convenient as possible for the people around him, and she was not going to be another person who did that. What she would do, when he was ready, was hand him the tools to respond to it. That was different. Gomez, who understood this perfectly and was also constitutionally incapable of sitting still while someone he loved was hurting, channeled it into action. He stood, went to the sideboard, produced from a drawer a leather folder that had been getting thicker all week, and brought it back to the table. He opened it. "This," he said, setting sheets of parchment in front of Harry one at a time, "is our response. Document 1, the custodial claim, already filed and stamped, citing the ancient and noble Council of Blood Right precedent and 17 supporting declarations from various parties in the magical community who owe the Addams family either money or significant personal favors. Document 2, a full accounting of Mr. Potter's living conditions at Privet Drive, compiled from 6 independent sources including 2 magical health assessors, 1 ministry social welfare officer who did a visit in 1988 and filed a report that was subsequently buried, and a ghostly deposition from the spirit of the previous owner of number 4, who witnessed things through the walls. Document 3, a challenge to the provision of extraordinary magical circumstances on the grounds that it has never in its 8 applications been successfully applied to a living person, making its application here novel, and novel applications require full Wiesengemot review rather than summary adjudication. He sat back. His eyes were bright. Document 4, he said, pulling out the last page with the particular satisfaction of someone producing the ace from a hand he's been holding since the game started, is a letter from the Department of International Magical Cooperation acknowledging the Addams family's designation as a registered ancient magical lineage under the Magical Heritage Preservation Accord of 1847, which grants us custodial rights equivalent to those of the Sacred 28 under circumstances of, were not. Sacred 28, Harry said, looking at the document. "No," Gomez agreed happily. "We're considerably older. The Sacred 28 are new money, darling boy. We've been practicing magic since before most of those families learned to write their names." Harry stared at him. "You have." "The Addams family," Gomez said, leaning forward on his elbows with the expression of a man approaching his favorite subject, has documented magical practice going back to the 11th century and probable practice going back considerably further, in a line that crosses 5 continents and has at various points included 2 alchemists, a sea witch, 3 practitioners of what the current classification system calls unforgivable but what we have always simply called Tuesday, and a great-great-grandmother who reportedly turned the tide at the Battle of Gomez, Morticia said. "Right. The point is, the legal standing is extraordinary. Crossmore says it's the strongest custodial case he's seen in 40 years. He closed the folder. The ministry is going to walk into that hearing expecting to manage a fringe magical family making a sentimental claim, and they are going to find something significantly different." Harry looked at the folder. At Gomez. At Morticia. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. It came out very direct, very honest. Not ungrateful, the opposite of ungrateful, but the question of someone who has learned to look for the string attached to good things and was trying to find it and couldn't and needed to understand why it wasn't there. Gomez blinked. "What do you mean, why? People don't just," Harry stopped. "Start it again. There's usually something they want." Gomez looked at Morticia. Morticia looked at Harry. "We want you to be fine," she said. That's all. There's nothing else. He held her gaze for a long moment. He was looking for the lie, she understood, not because he thought she was lying but because he had been conditioned to look for the lie in kindness, the way some people flinch at raised hands. She let him look. She had nothing to hide and she had patience to spare. He nodded. Once. The sharp nod, but softer this time. Okay, he said. What do I need to do for Monday? Look composed, Gomez said. Don't speak unless spoken to directly, and if you're spoken to directly, tell the truth. You're very good at telling the truth. It's one of your better qualities. And if Dumbledore is there? He will be, Morticia said. What do I do if he talks to me? Listen, she said. If you want to respond, respond. If you don't want to respond, you don't have to. You're not on trial. You're not a witness. You're the subject of the hearing, which means you have the right to be present and the right to say nothing at all, and both are equally valid. He processed this. He's going to make it hard, he said. Not worried, just clear-eyed. He talks in a way that makes you feel like saying no would be cruel. Yes, Morticia said. He does. How do I not get, remember, she said, that the feeling is real and the conclusion isn't. He will make you feel that you are being difficult. That feeling is genuine, it's the product of his considerable skill. The conclusion that follows from it, that you should concede, doesn't actually follow. The feeling and the conclusion are separate things. She looked at him. You are allowed to feel bad about disappointing someone and still decline to do what they want. He was very still for a moment. Then, no one's ever told me that before. I know, she said. Monday arrived the way Mondays always did, with more gravity than they had earned and less mercy than you hoped for. They took the Packard to London. Harry in the back with Morticia, Wednesday between them because she had decided to come and no one had seriously argued against it, Gomez in the front with Lurch going over documents and making phone calls on a mobile that technically shouldn't have worked in the car but worked anyway, the way most technology worked or didn't around the Addams family based on its own assessment of whether it was needed. Augustine Crossmore was meeting them at the Ministry entrance. The Ministry of Magic's public entrance in London was a phone box on a quiet street, which Morticia found architecturally unambitious. The private entrance used by legal parties in official proceedings was a door on a different street, black-painted, brass-handled, set into a wall between a sandwich shop and an insurance brokerage, and it opened onto a staircase that went down considerably farther than the depth of the building should have permitted. Crossmore was waiting at the bottom. He was 83 and looked every year of it, small and compact with white hair that had given up any organizational pretense, wearing wizarding robes that were technically formal and practically ancient, the kind of robes that had been to so many important occasions that the importance had soaked into the fabric. He had small bright eyes and the unhurried manner of a man who had been the most qualified person in most rooms for 30 years and had grown comfortable with it. He looked at Harry with the assessing but not unkind attention of someone cataloguing a client. Mr. Potter. He shook his hand with a firm, brief grip. I've been waiting to meet you for some time. He said it without the quality of awe that Harry had come to dread and without condescension either, just factual, like a navigator acknowledging a landmark. Sir, Harry said. Don't call me sir. I'm Augustine. He turned and began walking before the sentence was finished, the way very confident old people walk, as though a rival is already established and the walking is just a formality. We have 40 minutes before proceedings begin. I'll walk you through the structure. Gomez has briefed you on the documents, good. Mrs. Addams, the counter-petition for the ancient blood right precedent has been accepted for consideration, which is better than I expected and suggests someone in the adjudication office has actually read the 1847 Accord recently, which in turn suggests someone has been doing their homework. He glanced at Morticia. I sent a copy to the minister's research office, Morticia said, with a letter from Gomez highlighting the relevant passages. Purely informational. Crossmore almost smiled. Of course. He turned a corner. The ministry corridors were wide and bureaucratic, busy with the particular energy of a Monday morning in an institution that ran primarily on paper and was perpetually behind, witches and wizards moving in both directions with the purposeful near collision of people going to places they were slightly late for. Several of them glanced at their group as they passed. The glances at Harry had the quality she had seen at the feast: recognition, complicated feeling, and Harry walked through them with his chin level and his hands at his sides and his face doing a very creditable impression of a person who was fine. Wednesday walked on his left and looked at everyone who looked at him with the particular expression that caused most people to look somewhere else almost immediately. The courtroom, if it could be called that, was courtroom 10, deep in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, and it was smaller than Morticia had expected and older than almost anything else she had seen in the building: stone walls, stone benches, a tiered seating arrangement that suggested it had been designed for censure rather than deliberation. It smelled like stone and old decisions. The gallery was already half occupied with witches and wizards in official robes, some of whom she recognized from the names on documents and some of whom she recognized from photographs in Gomez's research files. Cornelius Fudge was at the front. Minister for Magic, a round-faced man in a lime-green bowler hat that she considered the most confident bad decision in a room full of bad decisions. He sat at the adjudicator's position with the expression of a man who had been told this would be straightforward and was beginning, from the quality of Crossmore's stride as he entered, to suspect it might not be. Dumbledore was there. He was in the gallery rather than at the official table, correctly, since he was a supporting declarant rather than a party, a distinction Crossmore had made very clear in the preliminary filings. He sat in the second row in his purple robes, the half-moon spectacles, the silver beard, and he looked at Harry when Harry entered with an expression that was open and warm and genuinely complex, and Harry looked back at him with the specific, hard-won composure of someone who had spent a week learning to separate a feeling from a conclusion. Dumbledore inclined his head. Harry inclined his in return. Morticia noted this and said nothing. They sat. Crossmore arranged his documents with the economy of motion of someone who had arranged documents in this room many times. Fudge cleared his throat and began. It started the way these things always started, procedurally, almost tediously, the formal naming of parties, the recitation of relevant statutes, the careful administrative scaffolding that bureaucracies build around their important moments to make the important moments feel inevitable. Fudge read in the flat cadence of a man reading something prepared by someone else, which he was, and the ministry's presenting advocate, a young witch named Dolores Umbridge who had the pleasant, rounded face of a china doll and the eyes of someone doing elaborate arithmetic, began laying out the ministry's position. Morticia listened. She had a very good ability to listen, not performative listening, but the actual kind, where you absorb without interrupting and file without reacting and emerge with a complete picture of not just what was said but what the saying revealed about the person saying it. Umbridge's argument was polished, well-sourced, and built on a premise she kept returning to like a musician returning to a main theme: the extraordinary circumstances surrounding Harry Potter required extraordinary oversight, and extraordinary oversight was best provided by an institution with the experience, infrastructure, and historical mandate to handle such circumstances. She never used the words, Dumbledore's plan. She used, established protective protocols. She never said, we need the boy at Hogwarts. She said, Mr. Potter's education and development are best served by enrollment in the wizarding community's premier institution. She's good, Harry murmured, very quietly, to Morticia. She's practiced, Morticia murmured back. There's a difference. Crossmore's response began mildly. This was deliberate. She knew from Gomez that Augustine Crossmore's courtroom style was gradual construction, each point stacked carefully on the previous one until the structure was self-evident and the opposition realized too late that they were standing on sand. He walked through the 1847 Accord with the unhurried thoroughness of a man who had read it more times than the people who wrote it. He presented the ancient blood right precedent with 3 supporting cases, 2 of which predated the ministry itself. He submitted the social welfare report from 1988, and when he submitted it there was a silence in the courtroom that had a different texture than the previous silences, the silence of a room where something true has been placed on the table and no one is quite ready to respond to it. The child, Crossmore said, in the measured voice he had been using for the last 40 minutes, spent 9 years sleeping in a cupboard under the stairs of his relative's home. This is documented. It is not disputed by any party in this proceeding, including the Ministry of Magic, which received a welfare report in 1988 and chose not to act on it. He paused. The question before this court is not whether Mr. Potter requires care and protection. The question is who is better equipped to provide it, an institution that permitted his suffering for 9 years in service of a strategic objective, or a family that has formally and legally claimed him and whose 16-square-mile property in the Hudson Valley is warded against every known form of dark incursion by methods that predate the ministry by 3 centuries. Fudge shifted in his seat. The wards at Privet Drive protected Mr. Potter from external magical threats, Crossmore said, with the gentle implacability of a man who had anticipated this interruption. They provided no protection from internal threats. The distinction is relevant. Dumbledore rose from the gallery. Fudge looked at him, and there was a very clear dynamic in that look, the look of a man who needed the other man to say something that resolved this. Albus, Fudge said, perhaps at this juncture, if I might, Dumbledore said. Crossmore turned. He looked at Dumbledore with the expression of a man who has been waiting for a specific guest to arrive. Professor Dumbledore. You submitted 3 supporting declarations. I have responses to all 3. Shall we take them in order? Dumbledore looked at Crossmore with a recognition that was, she thought, genuine. They had been at Hogwarts together. Crossmore had known the young Albus Dumbledore before he was a legend, which was the most effective cure for being impressed by a legend. Augustine, he said, warmly. I wonder if I might speak to the practical matter directly. Of course, Crossmore said, sitting down with the smooth movement of someone clearing the floor. Dumbledore turned to address not Fudge, not Crossmore, but Harry. Harry looked back at him. His hands were flat on the table in front of him, she noted this, the conscious stillness of it, the choice, and his face was the composure she had been watching him build all week, real and self-constructed and slightly effortful but genuinely his. Harry, Dumbledore said, and his voice was the warmest thing in the cold stone room, I want you to know, first, before anything else, that I am glad you are well. That you are safe. That you are, he paused, and the pause was genuine, not performed, in a place where someone cares for you. I am glad for that. Thank you, Harry said. Steady. What I must ask you to consider, Dumbledore continued, the warmth still there and underneath it now the full, patient weight of a man who believed completely in what he was saying, is the larger picture. The world that you are part of, the wizarding world, is facing something it has faced before and will face again, and you, Harry, you are central to it. Not because I say so. Because of forces much older than either of us. He held Harry's gaze. If you are away from the wizarding world. If you are not trained within it, embedded in it, known by it, he's a child, Morticia said pleasantly. Dumbledore turned his attention to her. The courtroom was very still. Mrs. Addams, he said. I have read about your family. I understand, I genuinely understand, the depth of what you are offering him. I do not question your intentions or your affection. I am asking you to consider that there are stakes beyond a child's happiness. I'm going to stop you there, Morticia said. She said it with the same tone she used for everything, quiet, unruffled, the voice that didn't need to compete with anything because it had already filled the available space. But the interruption itself was so clean and so final that the room felt the edge of it. My family, she said, has been practicing magic for 1,000 years. We have lived through dark lords, dark ages, dark incursions of every variety, and events that the Ministry of Magic's historical record doesn't contain because they predate your institution. We are not unfamiliar with large stakes. She looked at Dumbledore with the expression she used for things she considered worth examining carefully. What I am hearing, when you speak of Harry's necessity to the wizarding world, is an argument that his value as a weapon justifies his suffering as a child. I want to be precise about this because I want to be sure we're not obscuring it. The courtroom's quiet deepened. He is not a weapon, she said. He is not a sacrifice. He is not a strategic element in a plan drawn up by people who did not consult him. He is 11 years old and he is mine, and we are going to do this correctly. She held Dumbledore's gaze. The threat you're describing, Voldemort's return, is real. I believe you. I have made my own assessments and they agree with yours. When that threat materializes, Harry will be trained, capable, and informed. He will not be traumatized, manipulated, or positioned as a willing sacrifice. He will have a choice. She let this land. That is the difference between what I'm offering and what you've been providing. Dumbledore was quiet for a long time. The blue eyes above the half-moon spectacles held hers with the full, undeflecting attention of a man being told something he had been not quite hearing for a long time and was now being required to hear. You believe, he said at last, slowly, that he can be both ready, and whole. I know it, she said. Another silence. Fudge was looking between them with the expression of a man watching a tennis match between players he didn't entirely understand. Umbridge's pleasant face had achieved a quality of careful blankness that Morticia recognized as the expression of someone recalculating. Dumbledore sat down. It was not surrender. She didn't expect surrender. It was the sitting down of a man who had just had his argument move under him and needed to find new ground, and who was, to his considerable credit, honest enough to need a moment to do so. Crossmore rose. He was extremely brief. The Addams family's custodial claim under the 1847 Accord is complete, documented, and legally unassailable, he said. Mr. Potter's prior living conditions constitute grounds for the claim's immediate formalization without further review. The Ministry's invocation of the provision of extraordinary magical circumstances is novel in its application to a living person and requires, as I have documented, full Wisengamot review before it can be acted upon, which will take no less than 8 months. In the interim, Mr. Potter remains in the custody of his formally designated guardians. He closed his folder. Unless there are other questions? There were not. Fudge deliberated for 6 minutes, which was 4 minutes less than Crossmore had predicted and 2 more than Gomez had, making this technically a draw. The adjudication came down on the side of the custodial claim, pending Wisengamot review of the Ministry's counter-application, which Crossmore had already privately told Gomez would almost certainly fail on the novel application grounds and would take, if they were lucky, 18 months. Harry walked out of courtroom 10 beside Morticia, and in the corridor he exhaled, one long, controlled exhale, and his shoulders came down about a centimeter from where they had been. She saw it and said nothing. The Wisengamot review, he said. That's not over. No, Morticia said. But it's 18 months of you being exactly where you are. He nodded. They walked. The Ministry corridors were still busy around them, still full of the Monday energy of an institution perpetually behind. He looked sad, Harry said. At the end. Dumbledore. Yes, she said. He genuinely thinks he's right. He genuinely is right about some things, she said. That's what makes it complicated. The threat is real, Harry said. Not a question. Yes. And I'm going to have to deal with it eventually. Yes, she said. But not today. She glanced at him. How are you? He thought about it honestly, the way she was learning he thought about most things, not the reflex answer, the actual one. I think, he said carefully, that he paused. I think I'm angry. A bit. Good, she said. He blinked at her. Good. You've had a great deal to be angry about for a very long time, she said. Anger that has been felt and named is significantly less dangerous than anger that has been denied and stored. She looked at him. Be angry. It won't break anything important. He was quiet for a moment. Then, startling her slightly, he laughed, a brief, genuine sound, more breath than noise, the laugh of someone whose system has just released something through the only available exit. "You're very strange," he said, and there was nothing but affection in it. "Deeply," she agreed. Behind them, Gomez had crossed Moore by the arm and was walking him toward the exit at pace, already talking about the Wisengamot review strategy with the enthusiasm of a man being handed a better problem than the one he started with. Wednesday was walking with her hands behind her back, observing the ministry employees around her with an expression that suggested she was conducting a private assessment of their general competence and finding the results about what she'd expected. Lurch was waiting with the car outside. Harry got in, and Morticia got in, and the Packard pulled away from the ministry building into the grey London afternoon, and Harry sat for a while watching the city go past the windows and then said, without preamble, "Can I write to Dumbledore?" She looked at him. "Of course. Not to negotiate anything. Just." He looked at the passing city. "I want him to know that I know he's not the enemy. He stopped. Found it. I want him to know I'm making a choice. Not being kept from something. Making a choice." Morticia was quiet for a moment. The city moved past outside. "That," she said, "is exactly the right instinct." He nodded. Settled back into the seat. Closed his eyes for a moment. She looked out her own window. The clouds over London were the deep grey of old pewter, and the light that came through them was the diffuse, directionless light of a city where the sun exists more as a rumor than a fact, and below it 8 million people were going about their Monday with the purposeful near collision of people moving toward things they hadn't decided yet. She found it, she had to admit, rather beautiful. Chapter 5, The Dark Comes Calling. The wards screamed at 3 in the morning on a Wednesday. Not literally. They were not the kind of wards that made noise. They were the kind that communicated through the bones of the house itself, a deep subsonic shudder that moved through the walls and floors and up through the feet of anyone standing on them, and which Harry felt for the first time as a vibration in his sternum, like a bass note held too long. He was awake before he understood why, sitting up in the dark with Hedwig shifting on the pillow beside him and the obsidian stone Morticia had given him at age 7 suddenly warm in his palm, which was where it always was when he slept, which was a habit he hadn't examined until just now when its warmth was doing something more than comforting. He was on his feet before he was fully conscious of deciding to be. The corridor outside his room was dark but not quiet. There were sounds from downstairs, not alarmed sounds exactly but the sounds of a house that had shifted from resting to alert, the difference the way a sleeping animal's breathing changes when it scents something. He went to the door and opened it, and Wednesday was already in the corridor, dressed, her dark hair loose, holding something in each hand that he couldn't immediately identify in the dark. 3 of them, she said. West Boundary. They came through the lower ward first, Father's already downstairs. Death Eaters? Harry asked. Probably. She was already moving toward the stairs. The West Boundary is the old section. The wards there are different. He followed her. Different how? Older, she said. They're not Hogwarts style. They don't push intruders back. They encourage them in. He processed this as they reached the landing. That sounds terrible. For the intruders, she said, yes. The entrance hall was lit. The chandelier's 40 candles were all burning, which happened automatically when the house decided something required seeing. Gomez was already at the front door in a dark red dressing gown that he somehow made look like full armor, a rapier in his right hand and his wand in his left, and the expression of a man who had been hoping something interesting would happen and was gratified to have his optimism rewarded. Uncle Fester was at the window, looking out with a happy intensity that suggested the situation was activating something core in him. Morticia came down the stairs behind Harry and Wednesday, fully dressed in the way she was always fully dressed, as though the concept of being caught unprepared simply wasn't a category her life contained. She was carrying nothing and wore no expression in particular, the same composure she brought to the garden, to the ministry, to everything. But the quality of her stillness had shifted. The garden pruning stillness was patience. This was something else. Something that had identified a target. 3 entry points, she said, to no one specifically and everyone present. West Garden, the kitchen side, and, she paused, tilting her head slightly the way she did when she was listening to something outside the available frequencies, the east window on the 3rd floor. The 3rd floor, Harry said. The corridor that goes sideways. Yes. But I thought, he had tried to enter the east corridor alone on day 3 and had experienced a brief, disorienting sensation of being turned around and arriving back at the stairs. I thought that corridor was difficult. For you, Morticia said. Until you know it. For uninvited guests it tends to be more definitive. She looked at him. Stay with Wednesday. I'm not staying anywhere, he said. She looked at him. He looked back. He wasn't performing bravery, he had thought about it, literally in the 3 seconds since she had said stay with Wednesday, and the conclusion had come cleanly. He was not a child to be put in a safe room while things happened around him, and the Addams family had not spent 2 weeks teaching him things for him to stand still in a corridor while people came to hurt everyone in his vicinity. The green eyes behind the cracked glasses were level and certain, and Morticia looked at them for a moment and then said, West Garden, and turned and walked toward the back of the house. Harry went with her. The back door opened onto the kitchen garden, which was a small enclosed space with raised beds, and beyond it the gate to the main garden, and beyond that the broad stretch of dark lawn that ran to the old stone wall at the property's west edge. The night was clear and cold and the stars were out, and the garden was very dark and very quiet in the specific way that dark quiet places get when something is moving through them. She moved without a light. He moved behind her without one either, because the stone in his palm was doing something that extended his awareness in a way he didn't have words for yet, not sight, exactly, but a kind of knowing where the path was and where the grass ended and where the night air changed quality because someone was displacing it. He had been doing this since he arrived. The learning had been nothing like school, no curriculum, no tests, no approved reading list. Morticia had watched him for the first 2 days and then on the 3rd day had set him in the kitchen garden with a handful of soil and said, "Feel what's in it." He had looked at the soil. He had looked at her. She had gone back inside. He had sat with the soil for 2 hours and by the end of it had found, not magic exactly, not the kind he had glimpsed at Diagon Alley or felt crackling through the Great Hall at Hogwarts, but something older and more structural, the kind of magic that was in things rather than applied to them. He had come inside and told her what he felt and she had listened and asked 3 questions, each one going deeper, and then she had said, again, tomorrow. Different subject. And the day after had been plants, and the day after water, and by the end of the first week he had discovered that his instinctive, uncontrolled magic, the kind that had always gotten him in trouble at the Dursleys, turning things strange colors or appearing on rooftops, was not wild. It was responsive. It was paying attention to the world and reacting. She had told him that the difference between that and intentional magic was one of direction, not power, and that directing it was a matter of knowing what you wanted more precisely than you had before. He wanted, right now, to know where the people in the garden were. The stone pulsed warm in his fist. 3 points of awareness lit up in his perception like coals in the dark, one near the west wall, one moving through the rose garden on the south side, one standing still 40 feet ahead. He didn't say anything. He touched Morticia's arm and felt her stop and he pointed, west wall, south roses, directly ahead, 3 short gestures. She looked where he pointed. Nodded once. The one directly ahead moved. It moved fast and with the aggressive directness of something that had decided waiting was over, and it came out of the dark with a sound like cloth in wind and a flash of pale wan light that lit the garden in a strobe, a figure in black robes with a mask, the white mask with the holes for eyes that Harry had seen in his nightmares without knowing what it meant and now knew exactly. The first curse hit the space where Morticia had been standing. She wasn't there. Harry wasn't sure when she had moved. He was aware of her 10 feet to his left, already, as though she had simply been in the new location and the previous location had been a suggestion. The second curse, green, the killing kind, the one he recognized from the dreams he had about a flash of light and a woman's voice saying "Not Harry, please, not Harry," went into the lawn where he had been standing, which he also wasn't, because his feet had moved before his brain had specifically authorized them to, carrying him sideways and forward in the same motion, moving toward the threat rather than away from it in the instinctive calculation that close was safer than exposed. He was 12 feet from the Death Eater when he felt the magic come up through his feet from the ground, the same way it had come up through the soil on day 3 of the kitchen garden, the structural kind, the kind that was in things, but amplified now, urgent, shaped by the intention that was very clear in him, which was, stop. The Death Eater took another step and the lawn held him. Not violently, it didn't swallow him or break bones. The grass simply didn't allow the next step. The foot came down and the ground received it with the stolid certainty of earth that has decided it is not moving, and the Death Eater lurched forward and caught himself and looked down with the specific confusion of someone whose body has just failed to do a thing it has always reliably done. He looked up. Looked at Harry. "You," he said, from behind the mask, and the voice was young and uncertain in a way that the mask and the robes had been designed to hide. Harry looked back at him. The warm stone in his hand. The garden very dark and cold around him. The wards still humming their deep note through the soles of his feet. "Leave," Harry said. "The Dark Lord isn't here," Harry said. "You are. And you're on our ground." He felt the manor behind him, warm and lit, all its centuries of Addams magic in the stones and the soil and the old wood, and it was not angry, it was patient and thorough, and it knew the difference between a guest and an intrusion, and it was paying attention. "I'd leave." Quickly. The Death Eater reached into his robes. The curse he threw was better than the first two, aimed, fast, shaped by someone who had practiced rather than panicked, and Harry moved again with that same preconscious foot movement, but this time also raised his left hand, the one not holding the stone, and the curse split around him, not blocked exactly, more, divided, the way water divides around a rock that has decided it is a rock, and went into the earth on either side. There was a beat of silence. Then, a scream from the south garden. Not Harry. Not Morticia. Someone else, someone who had apparently encountered the rose garden's opinions about uninvited guests, and the roses in Morticia's garden had opinions of a particularly robust variety and expressed them physically. The Death Eater in front of Harry took one step back, then two, then turned and ran. Harry let him. He stood in the cold garden for a moment, breathing, the stone warm in his hand, and felt the manor's attention shift and reduce in the way of something that has resolved a question and is returning to rest. The deep hum in the soles of his feet quieted. From the west wall came a single loud thud, followed by silence, followed by Gomez's voice, magnificent. Absolutely, and then something that suggested a second exchange, and then quiet. From the kitchen side, a sound like someone being extremely comprehensively stopped, followed by Lurch's characteristic single sound of grim satisfaction. Harry walked back toward the house. Morticia was standing on the kitchen garden path, and she looked at him as he came through the gate with the full, quiet attention she brought to things she was assessing. He was unhurt. He was breathing a bit fast. He was holding the stone so hard the edges had left marks in his palm. She looked at the marks. She looked at his face. "The first one ran," he said. "I know," she said. "I watched." I didn't curse him back," he said. I stopped him. And told him to go." "Was there a reason?" He thought about it. "He was young," he said. "Scared. Under the mask." He paused. "I don't know if that was the right call. What do you think?" He turned this over. "I think if I'd cursed him I'd have been doing it out of fear. To feel powerful. He wasn't a real threat at that point." He looked at her. "But maybe I should have held him. For the ministry." The ministry, she said, with a specific dryness that acknowledged everything the week had been, would have found a way to make that complicated. He almost smiled. Almost. The adrenaline was still moving through him and his hands weren't entirely steady yet, and there was something sitting in his chest that needed a moment. Inside, the entrance hall. Gomez coming in through the front door with the rapier clean and resheathed and an expression of satisfied exertion. Fester appearing from somewhere, the particular smell of burnt ozone around him that suggested he had applied his electrical gifts. Wednesday at the foot of the stairs, entirely composed, the things she'd been carrying now back wherever she kept them, a single dark smear on her left sleeve that Harry chose not to examine too closely. 3, Gomez said. 2 down, 1 ran. Yours? Mine ran, Harry said. Gomez assessed him with the fast, thorough attention that underlay the enthusiasm. You're all right? Yes, Harry said. Good. Gomez clapped him on the shoulder. You were remarkable. Absolutely. He stopped. He looked at Harry and the usual ebullience quieted into something more genuine. You were very good, he said, and said it simply, without the performance, and it landed differently for the simplicity. Harry nodded. He was still holding the stone. Wednesday poured something from the kitchen and handed it to him without ceremony, the spiced cider, warm, the way Lurch always kept it on the back burner in autumn. He held the cup with both hands and sat on the stairs, and Wednesday sat beside him with 2 inches between them, which was as close as Wednesday got, and it was, he had learned in 2 weeks, exactly enough. The adrenaline was passing off now, and in its wake it left things that he hadn't had a chance to feel in the doing. His hands had steadied. His breathing was normal. And somewhere in the back of his mind, something was very quietly being reconfigured, a piece of self-understanding that had always been built on the question "Can I?" and was now being rebuilt on something different. Not "Can I?" that had been answered, clearly, in the dark garden with the cursed lawn under his feet. The new foundation was something else. Something more complicated and more important. What do I do with it? He felt Morticia sit on his other side. She had been in the kitchen, he'd heard her putting the kettle on, and now she sat down and held a cup of her own, and the house settled around them, the candles at their normal 40, the portraits back to their silent watching, the walls and floor quiet, the deep note gone. They'll come again, Harry said, after a while. Almost certainly, Morticia said. In bigger numbers next time. Probably. And eventually, he stopped. Reformulated. Eventually Voldemort himself. She was quiet for a moment. Yes, she said. Probably. Not soon. He nodded. He looked at the obsidian stone in his hand, small and smooth and very warm, and turned it over. Why does this get warm? He asked. You've never said. It was your mother's, she said. He went very still. She gave it to me the night she came to me, Morticia said. Not physically, she hadn't anything physical. But the impression of it was specific enough that I knew what to look for, and I found it at Godric's Hollow when I went in January of 1982. It was in the rubble. She looked at the stone in his hand. I don't know what she put in it. I've felt the edges of it. It's very old, whatever it is. Older than she was. Family magic of her line, I think, not Hogwarts training. She paused. I thought it should be with you. He looked at the stone for a long time. He turned it in his fingers, the smooth warm black of it, thinking about a woman who had put something in a stone and probably not known that she was doing it for a child who wouldn't have it for a decade. Did she seem, he started, and couldn't finish it. She loved you, Morticia said. That was everything she was made of, by the time she found me. She wasn't afraid. She was, unfinished. Concerned. But not afraid. She held his gaze. She knew you were alive. She could feel you. That was why she came to me, not desperation. She just needed someone to watch. He put the stone in his pocket, very carefully, and put his hands on his knees and looked at the floor. "Okay," he said. His voice was thick. "Okay," she agreed. He sat with it. She sat beside him and she did not put an arm around him or pat his shoulder or say it will be all right, she simply sat, which was what sitting with someone meant, which was being present for the weight of a thing without trying to lift it for them, and Harry sat with the weight of his mother's stone in his pocket and the weight of a night that had proven something in him and the weight of everything he had been carrying since the beginning, and it came out the way things do when they're finally allowed to, not dramatically, not in a flood, but in one long breath that shook slightly and one brief, honest sound and the heel of his hand pressed against his eye, quick and private, the way he did things he hadn't yet decided to share. Wednesday, on his other side, did not look at him. She looked at the floor. She was there. He straightened after a moment. Wiped his face. Took a breath that was steadier. "Right," he said. "Right," she said. Gomez was in the sitting room, on the telephone, speaking in rapid Italian to someone who was probably a lawyer and possibly wasn't, the conversation punctuated by the expansive sound effects of a man recounting something he considered a personal highlight. Fester had fallen asleep in the armchair by the fire with the totality of someone who burns bright and crashes hard. The house was quiet and warm and entire. Harry looked at Morticia. He had been looking for the right way to ask this for 2 weeks, circling it, approaching it from different angles, backing off because the question felt too large or the moment felt wrong or he wasn't sure he was ready for the answer. He had decided tonight that he was done waiting for the right moment and would simply ask it. "Why did you come?" he said. "To Hogwarts. On the first day. Why did you come yourself? Why not a letter, or a lawyer? Why did you come in person to the feast?" She looked at him. The fire from the sitting room doorway was warm and the entrance hall was quiet and the 40 candles burned. "Because a letter," she said, "could have been managed. A lawyer could have been delayed. A piece of paper could have been responded to, negotiated with, filed somewhere and considered later." She turned the cup in her hands. "If I came in person, if I walked through the doors before you were sorted and claimed by that place, before you ate the food at that table and slept in that dormitory and woke up belonging to it, then the question was immediate. Real. In the room. And you were there to be part of it." She looked at him steadily. "I didn't want this to be a thing that happened to you. I wanted you to be in the room when it was decided." He was quiet for a moment. "You wanted me to choose," he said. "Yes. You could have just taken me," he said. "With the legal standing you had. You could have gone to Privet Drive any time and, yes," she said. "But you didn't." "No," she said. "Because a child who has everything decided for him, however well-intentioned, learns one thing." She looked at him. "He learns that his own choices don't matter. That the people who love him know better than he does. That his job is to be grateful and comply." She held his gaze. "You have had enough of that." The fire shifted in the sitting room. The house was quiet. Harry looked at her for a long time with the green eyes that were his mother's around the edges and his own in the middle, and she watched the thing that had been coming loose over 2 weeks come the rest of the way loose, not breaking, not falling apart, but releasing. The tension of a life lived waiting for the floor to disappear, held all the way up since a cupboard under the stairs, for a moment simply, let go. "I didn't want to stay at Hogwarts," he said. "I wanted to. But I didn't." He looked at his hands. "That's the thing I haven't said. When you asked me in the antechamber if I wanted to stay, I wanted to say yes. I'd wanted to be there for months. Since the letter. But when you asked me," he looked up. "It didn't feel right. The wanting was real but the fit wasn't. Like wanting a thing that was built for someone else." "Yes," she said. "Is that," he stopped. "Tried again. Is it going to keep feeling like that? Like things that should fit don't quite?" She thought about how to answer this honestly. For a while, she said. You've spent 11 years being shaped to fit spaces that weren't made for you. That leaves, she paused, impressions. You'll encounter things for a while that don't sit right, and you won't always know why. That's not permanent damage. That's just time it takes. She looked at him. It gets better. Not in a straight line. But it gets better. He absorbed this. Nodded. Okay. Okay, she said. What's the plan? He said, with a shift in his voice, not lightning exactly, but moving from the deep water back toward the surface. For all of it. Voldemort, the Ministry, Dumbledore. The whole thing. For Voldemort, we prepare. Properly. Not in the way of someone being prepared as a weapon, but in the way of someone learning to be capable. She set down her cup. For the Ministry, we wait for the Wisengamot review, which we will win. For Dumbledore, she paused, for Dumbledore, I think the conversation isn't over. You think he can, I think he's capable of reconsidering, she said. Slowly. Painfully. With considerable resistance. But he's not a stupid man or a bad one, and bad plans under pressure sometimes become good plans when the pressure is applied correctly. She tilted her head slightly. He will come here, she said. Within the month. He'll request a meeting. And you'll give him one? Yes, she said. On our ground. On our terms. With you in the room, because it's about you and you should be there. She looked at him. And this time you'll know what he's going to say before he says it. Harry was quiet for a moment. Then something moved in his face, not the ghost of a smile he'd been managing for 2 weeks, but something more genuine, more real, the actual smile with actual wattage behind it, and it transformed his face in the way genuine smiles do, showing for a moment what it would look like later, at 15 and 17 and 20, all the iterations of the person he was becoming. You're very good at this, he said. I've had 11 years of planning, she said. He laughed, the real one, the full one, the one that went through him like something released, and it filled the entrance hall and bounced off the stone floor and the watching portraits and the dark walls, and several of the ancestors in the frames turned to look at the boy sitting on the stairs laughing, and their painted expressions did the subtle, difficult thing of paintings that have been somewhere long enough to have real feelings. From the sitting room, Gomez's voice, is that Harry? Is he laughing? Cara mia, is he? The phone was apparently still in his hand. Sorry, something wonderful is happening, I'll call you back. Harry laughed harder. Outside, the garden was dark and cold and the roses stood in their rows against the wall and the stars were very bright, and the 3 uninvited guests had been dealt with in various permanent to temporary ways and the ward hum was quiet and the house was exactly what it always was, excessive and warm and wrong by most standards. And in the entrance hall, on the stairs, a boy who had come in from the cold was home. Not in the way of being told he was home, not in the way of being given a home and instructed to feel grateful for it, but in the actual way, the way that lived in the body, in the warmth of a stone in a pocket and the sound of a ridiculous man on a telephone saying something wonderful is happening and a girl in the dark saying it isn't and meaning you're all right and a woman on the stairs who had come to a feast in Scotland on a September night and walked the length of a hall and said I'm here for Harry Potter like it was the simplest thing she had ever done, which to her it was, because it was just the truth. That was the home of it. Chapter 6, The Reckoning. Dumbledore came on a Friday. He didn't send a letter first, which Morticia respected. A letter would have been a negotiation tactic, a way of establishing terms before arrival, of controlling the framing. Showing up directly, with no advance warning beyond the brief shimmer at the gate that the manor produced when it recognized someone with significant magical power approaching, was either arrogance or honesty, and she had spent enough time thinking about Albus Dumbledore over the past 3 weeks to believe it was the second. She was in the greenhouse when the shimmer came. She felt it in the glass panes and in the soil under her knees and she sat back on her heels and looked at the door, and then finished repotting what she was repotting, because the plant didn't care about visitors and she was not the kind of person whose schedule bent to other people's arrivals. She washed her hands at the greenhouse basin, dried them on the dark cloth she kept on the shelf there, and walked to the house. Harry was in the library. He had been spending most mornings in the library since the attack, which she had noted without comment. Not hiding, the opposite, actually. He was reading with the focused, systematic appetite of someone who has understood that information is a form of preparation and has decided to prepare. He had moved through her journal of magical theory in 4 days, asked 18 questions, received 18 full answers, and had moved on to a preministry text on old magical practice that she had acquired in 1971 from an estate sale in northern Wales. He was reading it the way he did most things, fast, thorough, and with the pencil she'd given him on day 3 making small careful marks in the margins, questions rather than conclusions, which she had always thought was the correct way to read anything worth reading. She knocked once on the library door and opened it. He was at the desk by the window, the Welsh text open, the pencil in his hand, and he looked up when she came in with the immediate attention he gave her, which was not the anxious hypervigilance of someone waiting to be told what to do but the genuine attention of someone who had decided she was worth listening to. "Dumbledore is at the gate," she said. He absorbed this. Set the pencil down parallel to the book's spine. "Now?" "He'll be at the door in about 4 minutes, depending on how fast he walks." Harry looked at the book. Looked at the window. Looked at her. "Okay," he said, and stood. They went to the sitting room, which was the correct room for this, not the entrance hall, which was too transitional, not the library, which was too private. The sitting room had the fireplace and the large chairs and the dark walls and the portraits and the quality of a room that belonged to people who were comfortable in it, which was a kind of power unto itself. Gomez was already there. Morticia didn't ask how he'd known. Gomez always knew when something important was approaching, through some combination of the house's communication and his own instincts, which were better than he let on because he preferred to seem delightfully chaotic rather than acutely perceptive. He was sitting in the high-backed chair to the left of the fireplace with a document folder on his knee and a calm that was very different from his usual energy, the way a river looks different just before it drops. Wednesday was on the sofa, her feet tucked under her, a book open that Harry was fairly certain she was not reading. Lurch opened the front door. Dumbledore came into the sitting room with the unhurried grace Harry remembered from the corridor at Hogwarts, the tallness, the silver beard, the purple robes today rather than the deep blue, the half-moon spectacles and the kind and careful eyes that moved around the room and took in its occupants with the thorough, gentle attention of someone who understood that the arrangement of people in a space was always also the arrangement of their intentions. He looked at Harry last. Harry looked back at him. "Please sit down," Morticia said. Dumbledore sat in the chair across from Gomez, which placed him central to the room, facing the fireplace, the 3 Addams adults at points around him and Harry on the sofa beside Wednesday. Not a hostile arrangement, nothing about the room was hostile. But it was, very clearly, their room. "Tea?" Morticia said, from the chair beside the fireplace that was hers in the way that chairs belong to people who have occupied them long enough. "Thank you," Dumbledore said. He said it the way a man says it when he means it, and Morticia poured from the pot that had been sitting at exactly the right temperature on the side table, and the domestic normalcy of this seemed to cost Dumbledore something small, as though he had arrived armed against confrontation and found a sitting room instead. He wrapped both hands around the cup. He looked at Harry. "You look well," he said. "I am," Harry said. "The manner suits you." Harry glanced around the room, at the dark walls, the collection of things on the mantelpiece that defied coherent description, the portrait above the fireplace of a great something Addams who had clearly had extremely strong opinions about something and painted them into his own expression permanently. He looked back at Dumbledore. "Yeah," he said. "It does." Dumbledore nodded. He turned the cup once in his hands, a small, considered motion. "I owe you an apology," he said. The room was quiet. This was not what any of them had been expecting him to open with, and the room registered it, a slight shift, a recalibration. Several, in fact, Dumbledore continued. For leaving you in a situation that I knew to be unkind. I told myself, I have been telling myself for 10 years, that the magic of your mother's sacrifice, the blood wards, the protection they offered, that these things justified the conditions under which you lived. That the safety was worth the cost. He paused. I am not sure I entirely believed that when I told myself. I think I chose to believe it because the alternative required me to make a different choice, and the different choice was harder. He looked at Harry, and the blue eyes above the spectacles were doing the thing she had seen them do at the ministry, the thing where they were genuinely troubled rather than performing it. I am sorry, Harry. For the cupboard. For the Dursleys. For treating your childhood as a variable in an equation. Harry was quiet. She could see him with the feeling and with the conclusion separately, which she had taught him, which he was doing. The feeling was real and complicated and moved across his face for a moment like weather. The conclusion he was working toward deliberately. Why are you telling me this? Harry said. Dumbledore tilted his head slightly. Because it's true. You could have written it in a letter, Harry said. This isn't just an apology. You want something. A pause. Dumbledore looked at him with the expression of a man encountering a version of himself, the directness, the willingness to name a thing rather than circle it. You're right, he said. I do want something. He set the cup down. I want to talk about what comes next. Not in terms of custody, that question is, for the foreseeable future, settled. In terms of, he paused, everything else. Voldemort, Harry said. Yes. Sit down then, Harry said, which was slightly odd given that he was already sitting, but the tone of it was right, the tone of someone inviting a real conversation rather than enduring a managed one. Dumbledore registered it and something in his posture shifted, very slightly, in the direction of actual rather than performed. The prophecy, Dumbledore said, which Morticia tells me she's shared with you, she told me, Harry confirmed. A week ago. All of it. Dumbledore glanced at Morticia. She held the glance without comment. Then you understand, Dumbledore said, that when Voldemort returns, and he will, I believe within 3 years, possibly less, he will come for you. Not because I say so or because anyone plans it. Because the prophecy bound you together the night your parents died, and that binding doesn't simply dissolve. I know, Harry said. You know, Dumbledore repeated, and there was something in how he said it, not doubting, but recalibrating. The boy in front of him was not the boy he had expected to be speaking to. Not the wide-eyed, grateful, pliable boy that a decade of managed hardship might have produced. Not the hollow, damaged product of neglect either. Something considerably more difficult and considerably more real. What I want to know, Harry said, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, is what you haven't told anyone. The parts of the prophecy and the plan you've kept back. Because there are parts. He looked at Dumbledore with the direct, specific attention he brought to things he was taking seriously. I can tell. When you talk about it, there's something underneath the part you're saying. Dumbledore was very still for a moment. Gomez, quietly from his chair, he does this. I've noticed it too. He hears the shape of things. Dumbledore looked at Harry for a long time. The room was quiet and the fire was burning, and outside the tall windows the November garden was grey and cold and the roses stood stripped in their rows. Then he took a breath, and he set his hands flat on his knees, and he said, there is a possibility, a significant one, that in order to destroy Voldemort, the part of his soul that attached itself to you the night he attacked must also be destroyed. The room did not react dramatically. This was partly because 3 of its occupants had, in different ways, already suspected this, and partly because the Addams family's relationship with extreme information was one of absorption rather than performance. Harry sat with it. Turned it over. You mean I have to die, he said. I mean, Dumbledore said carefully, that there may come a moment when you are required to accept death. To walk toward it willingly. And that in that moment, something may happen. Something your mother's sacrifice set in motion that I don't entirely understand, and I want to be honest with you that I don't entirely understand it, because I believe that pretending I understand it fully would be worse than admitting I don't. Harry nodded. Once, the sharp nod. He looked at the floor between his feet. He was doing the thing, feeling it, finding it, turning it over. May, he said. What? You said may have to die. May come a moment. He looked up. You don't know for certain. No, Dumbledore admitted. There is theory, old magic, the mechanics of how a Horcrux, which is what I believe Voldemort created in you, how it might be separated from its host without destroying the host. It is theory. Not proven. Not, have you been trying to prove it? Harry asked. A pause. Yes. For how long? Several years. Tell me what you know, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him. Then at Morticia. She looked back, and there was a question in his look that she answered simply by the fact of not stopping Harry, not redirecting, not managing the conversation. Harry was in the room. Harry was asking. That was what this looked like. Dumbledore told him. He told him about Horcruxes, what they were, how they worked, the 7 of them he believed Voldemort had made, the 6 that would need to be destroyed before the 7th, which was Harry, could be addressed. He told him about the theory of sacrificial magic, about Lily Potter's death and what it had woven into Harry's blood, about the possibility, not certainty, but real possibility, that this protection, if Voldemort struck at Harry again with the killing curse, might destroy the fragment of Voldemort in Harry rather than Harry himself. He told him what he knew and what he suspected and, at 3 specific moments, what he didn't know and had been guessing. Harry listened to all of it. He didn't interrupt. He made 2 notes on the back of the book he'd brought from the library, the pencil moving fast and small. When Dumbledore finished there was a silence that was the working kind, the silence of a room processing something large and real. 6 Horcruxes, Harry said. Before we get to me. Yes. You know where some of them are. Some. Then we start there. He looked up from the notes. I'm not going to spend the next 6 years at a school being managed. But I'm also not going to pretend this isn't happening. He held Dumbledore's gaze. If you share what you know, actually share it, not in pieces, not managed, then we can work together. From here. On my terms and Morticia's. He didn't flinch from the directness of this. If you're going to keep holding things back to stay in control of it, this conversation is as far as we go and we handle it ourselves. Dumbledore looked at him for a long, specific moment. Then at Morticia. Then back at Harry. Who taught you to negotiate? He said, and the warmth in it was genuine, and underneath it was something that might, if given time, become real respect. He largely taught himself, Morticia said. We provided conditions. Gomez, unable to help himself, and I may have let him observe 3 separate depositions. Purely incidentally. Gomez, Morticia said. He watched. He has good instincts. Dumbledore almost smiled. The weight of the conversation was still in the room but it had shifted, changed quality, the way pressure changes when a valve is opened and the thing that had been building finds a direction to move. You want full disclosure, he said to Harry. Everything I know about the Horcruxes, Voldemort's movements, the timeline I expect. Everything relevant to me staying alive and everyone else staying alive, Harry said. Yes. And in exchange? Harry looked at him. The green eyes were level and sure. I stay in it, he said. I don't disappear. I don't pretend there's no fight coming. When the time comes, I do what needs doing. He paused. But I do it as a person who chose to. Not as something you prepared. Dumbledore sat with this for a moment. The fire shifted. Outside a wind had come up and the bare rose canes moved against the grey sky. I find myself, Dumbledore said slowly, in the position of accepting terms I should have offered a very long time ago. He looked at Harry and the regret in it was genuine and heavy and the particular kind that knows it can't be undone, only carried. I agree. Harry sat back. The tension in his shoulders that had been there since Dumbledore walked in released itself by degrees. He looked at Morticia. She gave him the smallest nod. You did that. It was yours to do. He looked back at Dumbledore. Okay, he said. Tell me about the Horcruxes. Start with the ones you can locate. And Dumbledore did. He spoke for nearly 2 hours. The afternoon went grey and greyer outside and Lurch brought a second pot of tea that no one acknowledged receiving and everyone drank. Gomez made notes with the speed and precision of a man who had made notes in high-pressure environments for 40 years and had developed a shorthand that was half his own invention. Wednesday, who had maintained her position on the sofa throughout with her book not read in her lap, asked 4 questions at intervals that stopped Dumbledore mid-sentence each time because they were better questions than he was expecting and required more honest answers than he had prepared. Morticia spoke rarely and when she spoke it was to clarify something she had found imprecise, and Dumbledore clarified it, and somewhere in the second hour something happened in the room that was not quite the dissolution of conflict and not quite trust but was genuinely the beginning of something more workable than what they had walked in with. Harry listened and asked and noted and occasionally looked out the window at the garden, and she watched him do this and she understood what he was doing, anchoring himself. Remembering where he was. The cold garden and the roses and the house behind them and the stone in his pocket that was always warm. When Dumbledore stood to leave the light was failing and the room had the amber quality of late afternoon in November, everything warm-toned and slightly softened. He shook Gomez's hand, which Gomez received with a firm grip and the look of a man who was prepared to have this working relationship but was not prepared to have forgotten anything. He looked at Wednesday, who looked back with the direct, assessing gaze that she reserved for people she had tentatively decided were worth the effort of actually evaluating. You're formidable, she told him. Thank you, he said, with what appeared to be sincerity. It wasn't entirely a compliment, she said. He almost smiled. I know. At the door, he paused. He turned back, and he looked at Harry with the full, honest weight of a man who had done something wrong and had found his way to saying so and was still carrying the doing wrong part without putting it down, because some things deserve to be carried. Harry, he said. I want you to know, everything I did was because I believed it was necessary. I know that doesn't make it right. I know that's not, I know. He paused. You deserved better than what I gave you. I am sorry for that. Genuinely. Harry looked at him. He held it. He held the feeling and the conclusion separately and he chose the conclusion deliberately. I know you are, he said. That matters. A beat. It doesn't fix the cupboard. No, Dumbledore said quietly. It doesn't. But it means we can work with each other, Harry said. And that's what we need to do. Dumbledore nodded. The blue eyes held Harry's for a moment, and what was in them was the complicated, adult feeling of a man looking at what might have been and what was instead and finding that what was instead, while not what he would have chosen, was possibly something better than what he would have chosen. A child who had been shaped into a weapon would have been ready. This boy was something harder to quantify and considerably more dangerous, and Dumbledore was old enough to understand the difference. He walked out. Lurch closed the door. The sitting room held a collective breath for a moment, and then Gomez exhaled and said, well, with the tone of a man for whom well contains an entire review of the afternoon's events and arrives at a positive verdict. He closed his document folder. He looked at Harry. That was one of the better negotiations I have witnessed in 50 years of watching negotiations. And I have watched some extraordinary ones. I've watched better, Wednesday said. You have not. The Brussels deposition of 1994. That was a different genre entirely and you know it. Both of you, Morticia said, not sharply, and both of them subsided with the cheerful readiness of people who had made their point and were satisfied. Harry was looking at the door. He looked at it for a moment and then he looked at his hands and then he looked around the room, the fire, the dark walls, the portraits, the second pot of tea, Gomez in his chair and Wednesday on her sofa and Morticia beside the fireplace and the whole improbable, excessive, warm and wrong by most standards reality of where he was. There are 6 Horcruxes, he said, to no one specifically. Yes, Morticia said. That's a lot. It is, she agreed. And one of them is in me. Currently. He nodded at the currently. He picked up his pencil from the sofa cushion where it had migrated during the conversation and turned it in his fingers. The theory he has, he said. About my mother's sacrifice. About the killing curse bouncing back. It's credible theory, Morticia said. I have my own thoughts about the mechanism. Sacrificial magic of that depth doesn't simply expire. It binds. She looked at him. I want to study it further before I tell you what I think will happen. I don't want to give you a conclusion I haven't finished reaching. Okay, he said. He looked at the pencil. How long do we have? Before Voldemort is operational. Dumbledore said 2 to 3 years, Gomez said, consulting his notes. Based on current intelligence, which he'll be sharing properly this week through Crossmore's office as agreed. I'll have it reviewed. 2 to 3 years, Harry said. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. Then he stood up, stretched, the completely ordinary physical stretch of a boy who has been sitting for 2 hours, and looked at Morticia with the green eyes that were very clear and very certain. Then I need to know more, he said. About the Horcruxes. About old magic. About how Voldemort worked and what his weaknesses actually are, not the version I'd get in a history of magic class. He paused. I know you have sources. I have some, she said. And the people you know, he said. The ones who aren't alive. Are any of them useful for this? She looked at him. This was the first time he had asked directly. In 3 weeks he had circled this aspect of her abilities, approaching it and retreating, and she had waited, and here he was asking plainly. 1 or 2 might be, she said. Can we try? Tomorrow, she said. Tonight you should eat something and sleep. I'm not tired. You're extremely tired, she said. You've been running on 3 hours a night since the attack. He opened his mouth. Closed it. You knew that. Of course. Why didn't you say anything? Because you were processing something and sleep deprivation during processing is sometimes useful if it doesn't go too long. She looked at him. It's gone too long. Eat. Sleep. Tomorrow we begin properly. He stood in the sitting room looking at her and something moved across his face, the thing she had been watching develop for 3 weeks, the thing that was not gratitude exactly and not love exactly yet, though it was heading there, but was the very specific feeling of a person who has found someone they can trust to tell them the truth even when the truth is you need to sleep. The mundane truth. The unremarkable, undramatic, daily truth that had been so comprehensively absent from his life that its presence was, still, slightly startling. Okay, he said. He went to the kitchen, where Lurch had made something substantial and set it at the kitchen table without comment, and Harry sat down and ate all of it and took his plate to the sink and washed it, which no one had asked him to do, and went upstairs. She heard his door close. Heard Hedwig make a soft sound from the perch by the window. The sitting room was quiet. Outside the garden was dark and cold and the stars were beginning to come through the November cloud. Well, Gomez said again, softer this time. Well, she agreed. He was beside her then, she hadn't heard him move, but he was there, and his hand was in hers, and they stood by the fireplace together in the warm and wrong sitting room that was theirs, had always been theirs, and was now also, in the way that mattered, his. He's going to be all right, Gomez said. Not a question. He's going to be extraordinary, she said. He already is. Yes, she said. But he doesn't know it yet. How long until he knows it? She considered. The fire. The dark walls. The portraits watching with their painted attention. The house quiet above them and the garden quiet outside, and somewhere at the top of the stairs a boy sleeping in a real bed with a white owl and his mother's stone and his own carefully penciled questions in the margins of a very old book. Not long, she said. She stayed by the fire for a while after Gomez had gone upstairs. She didn't need to stay, there was nothing to watch, no threat at the wards, no decision requiring her attention. She stayed because she wanted to, which was, she had always believed, the only reason worth staying anywhere. She thought about Lily Potter coming to stand slightly to her left in the garden, 3 weeks after Godric's Hollow, with nothing to say but a boy's name and the impression of a stone and the specific, structural love of someone who had burned herself away choosing to protect something. She thought about the letter arriving on a Tuesday, and the drive through Scotland in the dark, and a boy sitting up very straight in the back of the Packard trying to be brave, and the moment in the antechamber when he had said okay with the weight of a real decision in it. She thought about him laughing in the entrance hall, the Real laugh, the one that went through him, and she thought about him in the dark garden with his feet planted in the earth that had decided not to move, and she thought about him in courtroom 10 with his hands flat on the table and his voice steady. She had kept her promise to the woman who had come to stand beside her in the garden. Late, she would always think it was late, but kept. The way all promises worth keeping eventually are. She took her cup to the kitchen and washed it and set it on the rack and turned off the kitchen light, and the house settled around her the way old houses settle when their people are in them and the doors are closed and the wards are quiet, not a sound, exactly, but a quality. A completeness. She went upstairs. Outside, the November stars were very bright, and the bare roses stood in their rows in the dark garden, and the old stone walls of the manor held their centuries with the comfortable permanence of things that have lasted long enough to stop wondering if they will. Inside, everyone slept.